This happened on New Year's Eve back in 2017. I'm from Ohio, just outside of Cleveland, and I was flying home after finishing up a semester at the University of Rochester. I had to stay at school a week after the semester ended for personal reasons, so I unfortunately spent Christmas relatively alone. The flight itself was fine, but I'd already been in a sour mood before I even boarded the plane. I'm a big Browns fan, and as I was at the airport, the Browns lost their final game of the regular season to go 0-16, completely winless. And as a lifelong fan, it was a special kind of misery. I think we were the first team to go winless since like the 80s or something. To top it off, my flight was delayed, which ruined my family's plans for the night. Originally, we were all supposed to drive to my cousin's house together for a New Year's Eve party and stay the night. But because of the delay, my parents decided to leave early, taking the main car. I was stuck driving the spare car alone. My mom tried to make it up to me by leaving Vera, our golden retriever, behind to keep me company. I wasn't thrilled about making the trip solo, but Vera was always good company. I figured I'd make the most of it. By the time my Uber dropped me off from the airport, it was creeping on 10 o'clock. I didn't even bother unpacking, I just jammed all my stuff in the car, got Vera, locked up the house, and got on the road. The drive itself wasn't anything special, just miles of Ohio backroads winding through empty fields and patches of forest. There wasn't much snow on the grounds, just a light dusting, which was nice since I hated driving in the snow. It was pitch black dark though. The only light came from my headlights and the occasional farmhouse with its porch light glowing faintly in the distance. About halfway into the trip, Vera started whining. At first, I thought she just wanted attention, but then she stood up, pacing in the passenger seat. That's when I realized she needed to go to the bathroom. I groaned, knowing there wasn't much else I could do but pull over. The next clearing I came across was small, barely enough space for the car, but it would have to do. I remembered noting to myself how dark it really was out there. If not for the patches of white snow here and there, I probably wouldn't have been able to see into the woods at all. I jammed my hands in my pockets and tried my best not to freeze to death. Vera didn't seem to care about the cold or the darkness. Classic golden retriever. I let her out, not even bothering to leash her. She sniffed around the edge of the trees, taking her sweet time. She didn't wander far, just enough to do her business. And that's when I heard it. All of a sudden, a loud crashing sound echoed from somewhere in the woods. It wasn't just a branch breaking. It was heavier and deliberate, like someone or something was moving through the trees. I literally jumped from how loud it was. Imagine a grown man sprinting through the forest. That's genuinely what it sounded like. I scanned the darkness, squinting to make out anything, but it was too dark to see beyond the first few trees. Before I could react, Vera bolted directly into the woods. It was some worst nightmare type stuff, I'm telling you. She disappeared into the trees, and I lost sight of her in mere seconds. I yelled her name over and over, but she didn't come back. At that point, my heart was racing, and it started getting hard to breathe. The cold didn't help matters. I couldn't leave her out there, that wasn't an option. Without thinking, I ran into the woods blindly, yelling for her to come back. I didn't want to think about what she was chasing after, so I just ran, letting the adrenaline take over. The only light to aid me was my dim phone flashlight and the thin layer of snow on the ground. It was so dark I was practically running into the trees. I kept running, praying I'd find her before she caught up to whatever was in there. I ran until my lungs gave out from the cold, forcing me to take a break. After nearly falling over from exhaustion, I leaned up against a tree and felt myself about to break down. I honestly didn't know what to do. And then finally, I saw her. She was crouched low and shivering, walking slowly toward me. Her tail was tucked tightly between her legs. I had never seen her like that before. I dropped to my knees and embraced her. Relief flooded through me. She pressed against me and I could feel her body trembling. Something had terrified her. That's when I snapped back to reality and realized how serious the situation was. We were still in the middle of the woods, and there was still something out there. I sprung up from my position and told Vera to follow me. This time she obeyed and stuck by my side like her life depended on it. We started back to the car, but I had no idea if I was going the right way. As if things weren't bad enough, I damn near jumped out of my skin when I heard crashing from behind me. I didn't think, I just started running. Vera darted ahead of me and I followed her, praying I didn't trip. The crashing sound didn't stop this time. It seemed like it was following us. I can't even tell you how scared I was in that moment. I genuinely felt like I was going to die. By some miracle, Vera led me straight back to the car, and I practically threw her inside before slamming the door shut. As I was jumping in the driver's seat, I glanced back towards the woods, and my stomach dropped. There were 3 figures standing at the edge of the woods, watching us. I jammed the keys in the ignition and floored it out of there. I didn't stop, I didn't even slow down. I was still in shock. It wasn't until I'd driven a few miles that I noticed Vera was bleeding. I started panicking as I realized there was a cut just below her shoulder blade. Someone had stabbed her. I slammed on the brakes and ran around the car to the trunk. My mom always kept a first aid kit in every car, and for once, her insistence on being overly prepared paid off. I cleaned Vera's cut as best I could and wrapped it in gauze. She whimpered and I worried that I was hurting her, but I knew I was doing the right thing. For the first time since the whole sequence had started, I felt myself begin to relax. It was over. I tried not to think about it for the rest of the drive, but I was just so shell-shocked that something like that had happened to me. I ended up not telling my parents or relatives. I don't know why. It just felt like one of those things you keep to yourself. What I'm about to tell you is something I still think about often, especially during this time of year. This happened on New Year's Eve a few years ago. I was driving to my parents' house to celebrate the new year with them. They live a few hours away in upstate Pennsylvania, so I'd left in the late afternoon, figuring I'd get there with plenty of time to spare. The drive was supposed to be simple. I'm the type who really enjoys long drives, so a nice peaceful drive would give me some much needed time to think. But the weather had other plans. The snow started falling about an hour into my drive. At first it was light, just flurries dusting the windshield. Nothing to worry about. I thought the snowfall was actually quite pretty, but I'm pretty sure I jinxed myself. The further I drove, the harder the snow came down. It just kept falling and falling until I was literally in the middle of an honest-to-God blizzard. The highway turned slick and visibility dropped to almost nothing. My car, a little sedan, isn't exactly great in snow, so when the tires started slipping on even the smallest hills, I knew I had to pull over. There was no point in risking my life. It was my own fault for not planning out the drive better. I found a spot on the shoulder, far enough off the road to avoid passing cars, not that there were many. I texted my parents about my situation, and they seemed worried sick. I tried to reassure them that everything would be okay, but I honestly wasn't too sure about that myself. I figured I'd wait out the worst of the storm, hoping it would just ease up, but the snow didn't let up. In fact, it only seemed to get worse from that point. It just kept coming, piling up around the car and on the road ahead. After an hour or so, it became clear I wasn't going anywhere that night. My dad offered to try and get out to me, but I told him that that was a death wish. I told him that if the snow didn't let up, I'd call the police, which he begrudgingly accepted as a decent solution. I really didn't want to call the police, and I didn't have AAA either, so that wasn't an option. I told myself the storm would have to let up eventually, and I decided that if it didn't by the time I got tired, I'd call the police. The thought of spending the night in the car made me uneasy. I didn't want to run out of gas trying to keep warm, and I was worried about killing the battery if I kept the lights or heat on too long. I sat there, turning the engine on and off every so often, trying to conserve what I could. The wind howled outside. I was starting to feel the weight of the isolation when I looked at my rear view and saw headlights cutting through the storm from behind me. I literally wanted to jump for joy. A snowplow pulled up beside me. I was saved. I rolled down the window as the driver leaned out of his. He was an older guy, maybe in his late 50s. He looked nice. He was wearing a thick jacket and had a black knit hat that was pulled down over his ears. I remember thinking his face was really wrinkly, if that makes sense. It looked weathered, like he had spent decades in harsh conditions. I expected him to say something, but he just stared at me for what seemed like an unusual amount of time. Eventually, he spoke, asking me if I was okay. He had a really gruff voice, definitely a smoker, and it was honestly kind of off-putting. I told him that I didn't think my car could handle the conditions, trying to be friendly but also keep my voice steady. He nodded, saying that I wouldn't get far in a storm like this, especially with the car I had. He paused for a few moments, as if he were considering what to say. I watched his eyes scan my back seat, like he was looking for something. I was just about to respond when he offered to give me a ride. I hesitated. I didn't know him, and yeah, he seemed a little strange, but he struck me as a genuine guy. Plus, staying put with my car all night would have been stupid. I asked him if he could drive me to where I was going, and he said it would be no problem. I then asked him what I should do about my car, to which he shrugged his shoulders and said, "Leave it." After a moment, I agreed. I grabbed my bag and climbed into the cab of the plow. At first, the warmth was comforting. I felt the tension in my shoulders start to ease as I settled into the seat. He asked me where I was headed, and I told him about my parents' house. I gave him directions, and he nodded again, but didn't say much after that. The silence wasn't awkward, but as the minutes passed, I started to feel more and more uncomfortable. That's when I noticed something odd. He wasn't driving in the direction of my parents' house. I knew because the navigation was literally pointing in the opposite direction. I mean, we were on a local highway. There were only 2 ways to go. I tried my best to sound calm and asked him if we were going the right way in the most normal tone I could muster. I don't think I did a good job, though, because I could feel his demeanor slightly change with my question. Without looking at me, he told me we were taking a short detour and that the back roads would be better than the highway. I didn't know the area well enough to argue, but something about the way he said it made my stomach twist. We drove a little longer, and he did in fact get off the highway and start driving along some back road. At least the GPS said we were heading in the right direction. So I thought I was just being paranoid. Something in my gut was still telling me he was off though, so I started looking around the cab more closely. There were red flags everywhere. Empty liquor bottles rolled on the floor near his feet. There were torn up maps stuffed into the side pockets, and I caught a glimpse of a knife wedged between the seats. I felt my heart start pounding. You know that feeling where your heart just starts beating like crazy and you're worried other people can hear it? That's what was happening to me. By that time, I was also positive we weren't going the right way. The GPS kept recalibrating because he missed turn after turn, not even looking at it. I was panicking. As we continued driving, I spotted a house in the distance. It was the only one I'd seen for miles. I had to act. It felt like a lifeline. I waited until we got closer, took a deep breath, grabbed the door handle, and then kicked the door open as hard as I could. The cold air hit me like a slap, but I didn't stop. I slammed into the ground and felt my leg flare up with pain. I didn't care though. I got to my feet and started running toward the house. The man shouted something at me, and I glanced back to see him fumbling for something in the glove box, probably going for a gun for all I knew. I didn't look back again. I sprinted through the snow, trying not to slip until I reached the house. I pounded on the door, screaming for help. A man and woman opened it, and they basically pulled me inside. I collapsed onto the floor, trying to catch my breath. I told them what had just happened, and they didn't ask questions. They just called the police. By the time the cops arrived, the snowplow was gone. They said they'd keep an eye out and search the area, but in that storm, finding him was unlikely. They offered to give me a ride to my parents' house, and even helped me call someone to tow my car. I was beyond grateful. My dad was furious once he found out, and I haven't driven in the snow since. I always think about what might have happened had I not jumped out of the car when I did. I've never been one for parties, even in college. I got sick of the whole going out culture pretty quickly, and I found that I always had more fun doing something meaningful with a few close friends. I'm from a rural area, northwestern Ontario. This happened a couple years ago. Ever since I was a kid, my dad and his buddies had a New Year's Eve tradition of going ice fishing while everyone else was celebrating the New Year however they celebrated. My mom wasn't really in the picture, and we didn't have much extended family, so I grew up spending New Year's Eve on a frozen lake in the frigid cold with my dad, his brother, my brother, and my dad's friends. My dad isn't around anymore, and my brother moved to Chicago a number of years ago, but I still try and go ice fishing as much as possible, especially as a way to celebrate New Year's Eve. I'm not really sure why, I just feel like I have some kind of obligation to keep the tradition going. My two best friends, Nate and Trevor, are pretty rugged guys themselves. You know the type, those burly, lumberjack-looking dudes that seem more in touch with wilderness than society. That's honestly how I describe myself too. Anyway, the three of us tried to keep the tradition alive as best we could, which was great because spending New Year's Eve alone would be depressing as hell. Nate was the one driving that day. His truck was perfect for the job. Big tires, four-wheel drive, and enough room in the back for all of our gear. We'd packed everything we needed: rods, tip-ups, bait, a sled to haul everything, and a small pop-up shelter to shield us from the worst of the cold. The forecast predicted a clear night, but in Ontario, you never trust the weather reports entirely. We were prepared for anything. At least, we thought we were. The lake we were heading to wasn't a well-known spot, and that's what we loved about it. It was tucked away, surrounded by thick trees with a surface that stayed frozen solid even in the milder parts of winter. It wasn't a place you'd stumble across unless you knew exactly where to look. As Nate navigated the snowy back roads, the excitement started to build. There's something about the quiet stillness of ice fishing. Just you, your friends, and the promise of the catch. Definitely beats drinking beer after beer at some random bar. As we pulled up to park near the trailhead, I noticed someone standing nearby. He was a few yards away, bundled up in heavy winter gear, but something about him didn't feel right. He wasn't moving, just standing there, staring at our truck. At first, I thought maybe he was just a fellow angler sizing us up, but then I saw him glance down at his phone, then back at us, then back at his phone again. For some reason, it didn't feel casual. I don't really know how to explain it. It just felt off. I muttered to my friends that guy was creeping me out. The two of them looked up. Trevor shrugged his shoulders and Nate nodded but didn't say anything. We were about to start unloading when the man suddenly rushed towards us, waving his arms wildly. I rolled the window down to hear what he was saying. He started screaming that we needed to come help him immediately and that his buddy had just fallen through the ice. He pointed at his phone, saying the other guy they were with just told him. He sounded frantic, and his desperation was definitely real. We didn't even think. Trevor opened his door, and then we were all out following the man as he took off down the trail toward the lake. We didn't stop to grab anything, not even our coats. The urgency in his voice was enough to override any second thoughts. The man was practically sprinting, and we had to jog to keep up. As we got closer to the lake, I started to notice something that didn't sit right. He wasn't leading us to the usual fishing spots. Instead, we were heading toward a more remote part of the shoreline, away from where the ice was thickest. I was about to stop following, but it was too late. They appeared in view before we could do anything. Two more men standing near the edge of the lake. They weren't dressed for fishing, and they weren't moving. They were just standing there, waiting. I glanced down at their hands. They were both armed. My blood ran cold. One of them yelled at us to stop right there as we approached. He raised his gun and pointed it directly at me. I honestly can't describe the feeling that you get when someone points a gun at you. I hope no one ever has to experience what I felt that day. My heart dropped as the man we'd been following turned to face us, a smirk creeping across his face. We'd been set up. The second guy demanded Nate's keys, along with everything we had on our persons. We didn't really have a choice. These guys didn't seem like they were messing around. Nate reached into his pocket and tossed the truck keys to the man, and the three of us emptied our pockets. I tried to hang on to my phone, but one of the men told me phones too. Nate said his was in the car, which they laughed about. I've never been more furious in my life. How could we have been so foolish? I clenched my fists, wishing those guys weren't armed. I would have taken all of them on. Within moments, they grabbed everything and walked us back up the path at gunpoint before one of the men sped off in Nate's car. The other two backed away into the woods, presumably to their own vehicle. I debated following them, but I figured that wouldn't be much help. We stood there for a moment, shivering, before Nate pulled out his phone. I knew he had lied about it being in the car. I honestly don't know what we would have done had he not thought quickly on his feet. Somehow, we still had service. He called the police, explaining everything as calmly as he could. The dispatcher told us to stay put, and we huddled together for warmth as we waited for help to arrive. I was still so unbelievably angry. Nate was the worst, though. He kept kicking nearby trees and cursing at the top of his lungs. There was nothing Trevor or I could do to calm him down. The whole thing had happened so fast. I was honestly still processing it all. Why the hell would there be people out in the middle of nowhere on New Year's Eve of all days? It didn't make any sense. I'll skip all the boring details. The cops took an official report and were gracious enough to drive us all back to Trevor's house, which was the closest. As you might expect, Nate's car was never located, and those people were never caught. The three of us still can't believe what had happened. Trevor thinks we just stumbled into the wrong people at the wrong time, that they weren't planning on robbing us, but we just so happened to be the perfect targets. I think that's possible, but it still feels so unlikely. Who just springs a trap on some random people in the spur of the moment? But it also wouldn't make sense for them to be waiting for us at such a secluded spot. They had no guarantee anyone would show up. I really have no idea what to make of this whole incident. I used to work as a construction worker and engineer in the Philadelphia area in my early 20s. My co-workers and I would do basic work like constructing add-ons to already standing structures, like adding basements to buildings. One of our jobs in 2012 was to construct a small basement area and extend the main floor for a corner dentist building. The basement was to have a bathroom and 2 big storage areas. We were making serious progress. By the time of the story, we had working lights in the basement already. The basement had just been sealed off, so there was no longer a big hole in the ground, and since the lights were working down there, we had a source of light while we worked down there at night. One of my coworkers, Jordan, went upstairs and then outside to help with work on the add-on section outside. I was tinkering with the electrical components a bit. I was no electrician, but I had a basic understanding of what I was doing. But suddenly the power went out. I knew it had nothing to do with what I was doing. I figured there must have been a power outage in the vicinity. The 4 of us didn't keep our phones on us due to the nature of our jobs, plus how dirty our hands would get. We all kept them in our jackets that we hung upstairs, but luckily one of the tools we kept in our vests were flashlights. Before I could even reach and grab for my flashlight though, I started to hear a rattling noise. The closest way I could come to describing it was a bag of coins being shaken. Not exactly, but close enough. It seemed to come from inside the tiny, soon-to-be bathroom. I took the flashlight out from the pouch on my vest, turned it on, and aimed it towards the bathroom section. We had already put up a door, and it was slightly closed to be covering my view from the actual room itself. It didn't sound like any kind of infrastructural sound, so I had to imagine it was one of my coworkers. I went to the door, and as I wrapped my hand around the side of the door, I waited a second before pulling it open, just because I needed to gather my bearings. But when I did swing open that door, my flashlight revealed some person dressed in all black, standing facing the corner of the tiny room so that I couldn't see their face. That is, until the person turned their head like a deer reacting to a sound in the woods. All I saw through the flashlight was the glow in their eyes. I slammed the door shut and ran up the stairs in my heavy boots, looking for my coworkers. They were all outside, apparently about ready to pack up and call it a night since the power in all the nearby buildings had gone out. I counted 3 of my coworkers, so it couldn't have been any of them in that tiny room. I asked all of them if anybody else who worked in that building had been there at all that night. They all shook their heads no, so at this point I had to lead them downstairs to show them the creepy stranger in the basement. They followed me to the basement and to the tiny room, and as I feared would happen, That person I saw wasn't in there anymore, or in the entire basement for that matter. I was obviously embarrassed when they didn't believe me, but I wasn't going to hold them hostage and make them believe me. So we all went back outside and packed up. I was the one with the key to the building, so I had to lock up when everyone left. After getting into my car and seeing the others drive off, I can't describe it, but I got a feeling inside of me that made me want to go back down into that basement and check one more time for that person I was sure that I saw. I took a deep breath, got out, unlocked the door to the building, and went back down to the basement. The power was still out, so I walked down the stairs with 2 flashlights on, the one I was using before, and now my phone as well. I made it to the bottom step and then stopped. The dead silence in this cramped, unfinished basement, mixed with the fact that I was anticipating a sound, freaked me out to the point that I was about to turn around and go back upstairs. When suddenly, I heard the rattling again, coming from the tiny room again. I didn't even look, but when I heard it, I felt my heart in my throat and I stormed up the stairs, slamming the basement door shut again. I locked the door to the building and drove home. Thank God it was a Saturday, so I wouldn't have to be back until Monday. I made sure not to work in that basement alone anymore, however, and thankfully we finished the work within a couple weeks, and nothing else really strange ever happened. It was a normal night in the cold month of February. My wife and I were watching a late-night movie in our room in bed before going to sleep. At some point in the movie, the TV suddenly shut off, and the room went dark. My wife and I let out simultaneous grunts in annoyance. The lamps, clocks, everything went out, so the power must have gone out. I told my wife I'd go outside and check if the neighbors lost power too. I opened the front door and stepped out onto the stoop for only a second or two because it was freezing outside, but I could see lights on in the neighbors' houses, so it seemed to be just us who lost power. We have a fuse box in a small boiler-type room in our basement. It seemed unlikely it could have anything to do with that, but I had to give it a shot. I had no idea what else I could do. I went downstairs with a flashlight. One weird thing about our house is you have to walk down the stairs to get to the basement door. Like, the door is literally on the basement level. I was tired, so I kind of slowly and lazily stomped down the steps. When I got to the basement door at the bottom, I turned the doorknob and tried opening the door. It wouldn't push open though. I tried a little harder, but it still wouldn't budge. My wife must have locked it. I went all the way back upstairs to ask my wife where she put the basement key. She got out of bed and said she'd get it for me. I followed her downstairs to the kitchen where we had a key hanger. She flipped around the many keys until she pulled off the basement key and handed it to me. She then went back upstairs to the bedroom, while I went back down the stairs to the basement door. I put the key in the lock and turned it to the right, then tried opening the door again, but it still wouldn't open. I went back up the stairs and called for my wife to come down. When she did, I asked for help like a child, since she was the only one to ever lock this door. She came down the stairs with her flashlight, making fun of me for not being able to use a wooden door. And before she even tried using the key, she turned the doorknob and gave one good push, and the door creaked open. I was dumbfounded. I swore up and down the door wouldn't open. Then I joked that I loosened it up for her. Once again, she went upstairs to the bedroom. I entered the basement, flicking the light switch on, which only led to more darkness. Flashlight still in hand, I went to the boiler room. When I got inside of there, I tinkered with all the switches, flipping them from one side to the other until finally the lights in the basement flicked on. I was relieved. I shut the tiny door to the fuse box. Just then, however, there was a sound from outside of the boiler room, the sound of one of the basement closet doors creaking. I took a peek outside at both of the doors. One was closed, the other was slightly cracked open. My heart started beating faster as I went over to the door. I stood about 2 feet away from that door, listening. For some reason, it took until then for me to think, how would the switch in our fuse box for power be switched off all of a sudden? Then I started to think, what if the basement door was never locked? What if someone was simply pulling it shut? After a few moments of silence, I heard a deep exhale in the closet. I took off for the stairs, this time making sure to lock the door behind me. I had never ran up a flight of stairs so quickly in my life. I ran to our bedroom and yelled in distress to my wife. I was not acting like the man of the house at all. I'll admit I was too afraid. I did call the police though. At some point after the phone call, before the police arrived, we heard the sound of glass breaking outside. I looked out my window, but it was too dark to see anything in the backyard. When the police arrived, I led them quickly to the basement, but by then the closet door was completely open and it was empty. We also noticed shattered glass in one corner of the basement and things knocked all over the floor. Whoever was in the closet managed to climb up a ledge where we keep collectibles, smash the window, and climb up out of the basement to the outside. In other words, they escaped and were never caught. That night we kept the basement and living room lights on all night and locked every door in the house. The next day we had the glass fixed. We don't even live in a bad neighborhood, so it's really scary to think that something like this could happen to basically anyone. I work as a janitor at a commuter college campus I won't disclose for my own privacy and safety. My job entails cleaning the hallways, classrooms, and bathrooms of varying buildings on campus. Usually I work later hours in the day, like 1 to 9, when the campus is less crowded. It was a stormy night in the summer that I was working. The college offers summer courses, obviously, so yes, I work in the summer too. This was during one of the biggest storms we've had that year, extreme winds mixed with a torrential downpour. It was later in my shift, anywhere from 7 to 8 o'clock. I was currently in the activity center hall, which didn't hold any classes, just a big ballroom, a small theater, and varying classroom-type rooms used for general purposes. It was usually one of the quieter buildings on campus, apart from when events were being held in it. I very well may have been the only person in that building at that hour. I was cleaning in the downstairs section of the building, which held the game room, when suddenly the whole place went dark. Like pitch black, except for the red glow of an exit sign near the doorway to the stairs. The power surely went out. I took out my phone and called to one of the other janitors who was working in another building. He told me the power went out in his building too, which meant the whole campus probably lost power due to the storm. After hanging up, I figured my job down there was done, so I followed the glow of the exit sign, but nearly shit myself when I saw someone peering their head from around the stairway. I called out thinking it was maybe someone who worked in the building, but before I could even really say anything, they disappeared upstairs. I ran to the stairway to try and follow, given that I would have to most likely lock up the building now and had to make sure everyone was outside. Quite frankly, when I got upstairs, I didn't know what to do in the total darkness. There were very few backup lights that were still lit in case of blackouts, and they were very, very dim, only lighting up basically a little around their immediate surroundings. I started calling out in the dark, seemingly empty building that I had to close up. Everyone and anyone must get out. The hallway in this building did one big circle around the big ballroom, and backup lights were distributed throughout the hallway. However, like I said, they were far between and extremely dim. I started doing my round through the hallway, and I was pretty sure I heard footsteps behind me. I turned when I was under one of the backup lights, but I didn't see anything behind me. I continued around the hallway, checking each room. When I checked the last bathroom and found no one, I figured the building was empty and safe to lock up. Walking to the front of the building, I heard footsteps again. This time I knew someone had to be behind me. I turned and saw a silhouette standing in the dark just beyond one of the dim lights. I called out, "You have to leave the building," but the way they were standing there just made me uncomfortable. And just then, they turned and ran the other way out of sight. I didn't know what to do, but chasing someone and physically removing them from the building was above my pay grade. I continued for the front door, planning on calling campus police. When I got to the front door of the building, I turned back to the darkness that was the lobby of this building, and about 20 feet away from me, I saw that silhouette again, this time hiding behind a half-open door. I say silhouette because all I could see was a black figure. I didn't see any body or facial features. I left the building and called the campus police. A couple of them came to check out the building, but they couldn't find anyone. Later that night, I got a disturbing phone call. It was campus police. They asked me to describe the person I saw the best I could, but I truly couldn't. I couldn't see anything about them. Then they dropped a bomb and told me there was a killer in the area who was in hiding and was spotted by a local resident near the college campus. When I hung up the phone, I felt a shiver run up my spine. I didn't get much sleep that night. I also didn't feel safe at work for a while after that. When my grandparents passed away, instead of my parents selling her house, they just let me live in it instead since I was of moving out age anyway. I just had to pay the taxes and monthly expenses. At first I really enjoyed living alone, given that I could have whoever I wanted over whenever I wanted. But it quickly got lonely being alone, so I got myself a 2-year-old German Shepherd dog named Rocky. He was named after Rocky Balboa. Rocky's a very calm and gentle German Shepherd. He hardly ever barks, only when he feels threatened or if he's playing with another dog. I bought him a doggy bed the day after I adopted him and put it next to my bed. After I got Rocky, I always left the bedroom door open so that he could go get water at night if he were thirsty. One night soon after I adopted Rocky, I woke up to his barking coming from outside my room and down the hallway. I dizzily got out of bed to check what the hell he was barking at. I rubbed my eyes as I walked down the hallway, and when I opened them, I saw Rocky maniacally barking and clawing at the basement door. I didn't know what to do. Usually I'd call my dad to deal with something like this, but now it was on me, and I was terrified. I had to ask myself if I wanted Rocky to go down there with me, and I quickly realized there was no chance of me going down there alone. I opened the door ever so lightly, but it was enough for Rocky to push it open with his nose and run down the stairs. I flipped on the lights and followed close behind. Rocky was silent now, which I found a bit concerning. I looked around for him, calling his name, and then I saw him standing still, with his tail between his legs, looking up at something in an opposite corner of the room that was blocked by a wall. Rocky looked at me and his tail slightly raised as I approached him. I could now see what he was looking at. It was a closet door. Rocky's apparent bout of confidence was obviously short-lived, and he seemed to be back to his calm and timid self. All that was passing through my mind at that moment was, do I dare open this closet door right now? And who or what could be in there? I didn't know Rocky too well just yet, but I had a feeling he wouldn't attack whoever or whatever was in there. I'm still not sure whether I made the right move or not, but instead of opening that closet door, I took Rocky by the collar and walked with him back upstairs. He kept looking back at the corner of the basement until we got to the stairs. I shut the basement door and then dragged him back to my bedroom and shut the bedroom door. Then I went to the kitchen to call my dad. I had to call 3 times before he finally picked up in a groggy voice. I explained the situation and asked him what I should do. He said I should go back down there with a huge knife or some kind of weapon and see what's in the closet. I told him I was too scared to, and somewhere deeper into that conversation with my dad, I realized the basement door was open. I put the phone down for a second to listen to what I thought were footsteps, and I was right. Loud and clear were footsteps heading towards the front door. I ran to my bedroom and told my dad. He told me to hang up the phone and call the cops, and so I did. By the time the cops showed up, though, whoever was in the house was obviously gone already. Unfortunately, I left a large amount of cash down there by the bar. All of it was gone. The basement window was wide open, so we found the method of entry pretty quickly. Just turned out to be a break-in burglary when I happened to be home. This story took place just 2 weeks ago. I've always had a fear of basements since I was a kid. Now that I'm 18, my fear is obviously subdued a little bit, but I still will glance over my shoulder to any noise I may hear behind me. And I might get that slight butterfly in my stomach feeling when I'm alone. Well, on this cold Friday night, I was home alone, and since our biggest TV is in the basement, that's where I'd usually chill, especially to play video games. I was playing Fortnite with my friends, some crazy popular first-person shooter game. I had headphones in and I was really invested in the game. Yet even over the loud sound effects through the headphones, I knew I heard something come from behind me, like a thump. I took off the headphones and examined the back of the basement. Now our basement is huge, but also extremely cluttered and messy. If I wanted to actually thoroughly examine what's behind me, I'd have to get up, that's how bad it is. But I didn't feel that were necessary. Yeah, I found it a bit unsettling any time I heard a noise, but I really didn't think it was anything to be concerned about. I tried to continue playing, however I wasn't able to give my full focus anymore. Not with part of me constantly thinking about the noise. I took off the headphones and played with them off just because I was feeling extra paranoid and wanted to hear my surroundings. Shortly after taking off the headset, there was a sudden clank sound, and it had a metallic, echoey ringing to it. I turned off the system now because I was in shock. This was an intentional sound made by someone or something. I walked really, really slowly to the backside of the basement. When I laid eyes on the big metal air vent in the corner, that's when it hit me, that was most likely the source of the sound. I got as close as I felt comfortable, then stopped and just looked at the air vent for a second. I got a terrible, painful feeling in my stomach, and I felt like the life was literally being drained out of me when I saw a hand reach out from the air vent and start waving me over. Then a deep, raspy voice said, "Come here, I need help." At first I didn't run. I just gradually stepped backwards with my mouth hung open, looking at the vents. The person's hands gripped the vent and started shaking it aggressively, obviously trying to break it open. I screamed, "I'm calling the cops," but the shaking didn't stop. I did what I said. I called the cops and told them to send someone right away. The operator told me to go to a room upstairs with a weapon, lock the door, and hide. I was the most scared I'd ever been in my entire life. And the pain and fear of the situation only became worse when I heard a door bust open downstairs, and I could hear a maniac screaming at the top of his lungs. I'm not lying when I said he was screaming things like, "Where are you? I'm gonna kill you." I heard him run up the stairs. He probably ran up 2 stairs for every step because he was up the stairs in like 3 seconds. My heart was in my throat when he tried the doorknob to the door and started pounding on it so hard I could see the door caving in a little bit. I thought he was actually gonna break the door down. I had to climb out the window or I'd be a goner. I think he heard me though, because the banging stopped. I jumped from the window to the bushes below, and with a right stroke of luck, a cop car pulled up in front of my house. I basically ran into the officer's arms, begging them to go inside and get the man. They told me to wait in the police car, which they locked, while they both went inside the house with their guns drawn. Not even 5 minutes later, the 2 officers came out and they were holding the man in cuffs. The man in cuffs took my place in the back seat of the cop car, and from that moment until the cops drove away, he was giving me the most evil, hate-filled stare you could ever imagine. That stare still haunts me. The whole experience still haunts me. I still hang out in the basement occasionally, but nowhere near as much. The story I'm about to tell you is a series of blurry memories from when I was a little kid and we were living in our old house. My brother and I always hung out in the basement where our dad has his hockey table, pool table, and video games. We usually played on his Super Nintendo system, but at some point, I don't remember when it started, my brother and I would hear things come from the boiler/laundry room. The first time this happened though, my brother and I were playing some racing game on Super Nintendo. That was when we both heard it. The door to the dryer slammed shut. We knew that's what the sound was. We both called out Mom, figuring maybe she'd been in there the whole time without us realizing. But the room was dark and empty of any people. When we realized this, we both ran upstairs screaming for our parents, leaving everything downstairs still on. Our parents came down to humor what they probably thought was just our dumb childish antics, and nobody was in the laundry room. Moving along probably a few months, I was awake late one night for whatever reason, walking to the kitchen, passing the basement door, and remember hearing the TV downstairs turn on. It was one of those big old box TVs, so it made that distinct clicking sound as it turned on. I called Mom, Dad, and my brother's name. No one answered. I went to my parents' room to tell them, and they were both upset with me for waking them. My dad went downstairs to turn off the TV, and I remember him telling me it's a glitchy TV. There were a couple other suspicious happenings after that, but I'll move forward all the way to the last occurrence, and honestly the most horrific. It was a few days before we were going to move to our new house. Just about everything in the house was already shipped to the new house, but our parents were nice and let us keep the TV and video games downstairs until the last few days. My brother and I were once again playing video games. That's when I felt something hit me in the back of the head. I thought it was my brother at first, but then saw the red ball bouncing on the ground behind the couch we were on. Then the door to the boiler room slowly shut as my brother and I looked at each other with horrified looks on our faces. Once again, we ran upstairs screaming. Our parents once again went downstairs, but when they came back up, they were strangely silent. They told us to go to our rooms and wait there. A while later, a police car showed up, but our parents wouldn't let us out of our rooms. They wouldn't tell us what happened until we finally moved. Apparently, my dad tried to open the boiler room door, but something was holding it shut, or perhaps pulling it shut. Even so long ago, I could sense fear in my dad's voice explaining it. I don't believe in ghosts, but to this day, I still don't know what to make of what was going on in that basement. For only 2 years, there was this pop-up haunted house attraction that would open in October. It was unofficially called Haunted Hill House, because there was some sign that looked like it was bought from Party City or something that was propped in front by the parking lot, and it said Haunted Hill House. The parking lot wasn't actually a parking lot at all, just grass that was designated as a parking area. This was the year they closed down, and this was the year my friends and I went. I went with Matt, Michael, and Eddie. We went on a Thursday night because we were in college and all of us had Fridays off, so it was definitely quieter than it would have been on a weekend. There was surprisingly no line for the ticket stand, and when we followed the directions to the entrance, there was only a really short line there, I'd say like 4 people ahead of me. What we didn't realize though, is that they were only letting one person in at a time. We had no idea that was part of this haunted house. If anything, this would make it scarier. We shoved Michael in front to go first. I was second to last before Eddie. Every couple of minutes, they would tell the next person to go in. When Matt went in ahead of me, I actually started to get nervous. I hadn't done a haunted house since I was a little kid and I was with my family. Then it was my turn to go in, as this woman dressed in some bloodied costume opened the door and told me to enter. I stepped through the door, and as it shut behind me, I was in this dark building, lit up mainly by small flashing lights. As I walked through, I was faced with a bunch of gruesome props of mutilated dead corpses and other pretty horrific things. Once in a while, actors dressed in horrific costumes would jump from around corners or through little holes in the walls. And just about every single time they got me because I'd jump. I was in some dark hallway separating 2 rooms when I felt something brush up on me from behind. I let out a short scream as I turned, and in the darkness I could see a tall figure in front of me. I laughed after seeing it. Then something I wasn't expecting happened next. The actor started pushing me down this dark hallway. I could hardly see anything. I was going along with it thinking this was part of the attraction. I don't remember how long exactly I was allowing this actor to push me in the darkness, but eventually he stopped and I heard a door close and things went silent. I didn't know what was happening. I still thought this was part of the act, and I was definitely scared because it was pitch black. Then I felt hands grabbing me, but in a very weird way, not in a way that a haunted house actor should. I was being full-on grabbed, and so I pushed the person off and said, "Get the fuck off me, dude." I stood there in silence now. I said, "You're going too far, man. You can't touch people like that," thinking this was still just part of the haunted house act. I waited there, expecting the actor to progress me to the next part of the attraction or just do something, but nothing was happening. Enough time passed now that I knew this wasn't right, and so I took out my phone, even though they told us not to take our phones out at any time during the attraction. I turned on the flashlight and found myself in a storage room with props and janitorial equipment. But I'd be lying if I said that was the first thing I noticed. The first thing that caught my attention was the tall man, standing 3 or 4 feet away from me. He didn't look like an actor at all. He wasn't wearing a costume. He was just wearing all black with a black face mask covering half his face. I looked for the door as I said, "What are you doing, dude?" He didn't say anything. He just started making these motions with his arms as if he was acting like he was supposed to be a character. I found the door and left the room. I used my phone flashlight to navigate back down the dark hall the direction we came. When I found the next actor, who yelled at me to turn off my flashlight, I told them I was violated and assaulted by somebody who may or may not work for the attraction, and I wanted to get out of there. I could tell the actor was probably just some teenager not much younger than me, and he didn't know what to do really. He dropped his character act and told me to just keep walking that way and that I'm almost to the end. I asked where his boss would be. He said I'd have to go back to the ticket stand as the little manager's office is attached to the ticket stand. So I continued the rest of the haunted house, speed walking, making it clear I was just trying to get out. And a few minutes later, I was out. I found all 3 of my friends, who were confused how I ended up getting out last. I told them what happened, and then we all went to the ticket stand, and I asked for the manager. The worker said that he wasn't there tonight, but that he'd be back tomorrow. I told the worker about what happened, and she said she would alert the team about it. I requested my money back because of it, and she gave me back my 30. It was the next day that a girl from our college who we all knew posted on Facebook that she was sexually assaulted by someone in the same haunted house the night before, the night we were also there. This was the reason the place was eventually shut down that month. When I reached out to her on Facebook, it sounded like we had the same exact experience, only the aggressor got a lot more physical with her. She pressed charges on the owner of the attraction for, I'm assuming, negligence. The attraction staff of course swore that that man who assaulted the 2 of us didn't actually work there. I'm sure that's the truth, but I don't understand how they didn't have proper security measures in place to prevent something like this from happening. This was the first and last time I ever went to a haunted house attraction. I live in Fort Worth, Texas, and every year there's this big haunted house attraction that opens up. A few of my friends wanted to go this year, and I figured it's time I just finally experience a haunted house. For a little early context, I had a very troubled childhood that's caused me to develop PTSD, but I'll get more into that later. It was a weekend, so nobody wanted to go into this sober. My friend Noah hosted a little pregame for all of us. It was going to be 6 of us, my 3 guy friends and 2 of their girlfriends. We all smoked and drank in Noah's backyard, everyone thinking it would make the experience more fun. We bought our tickets for the attraction on their website while we were pre-gaming. I rarely ever smoked weed because it makes me kind of paranoid, but I guess tonight I wanted to try smoking again and see if I could overcome that barrier. And I felt good actually. I think the mix of alcohol and weed kind of canceled out the usual negative thoughts I would have from just smoking alone. Eventually, we called an Uber to the attraction, which was like 20 minutes away from Noah's house. There was a half-hour line, the place was pretty busy. We made friendly with the people in line ahead of us. I was pretty cross-faded honestly, but I wasn't gone. Like I remember just about everything that happened. When we got to the front, I started feeling a bit woozy, but I didn't say anything to my friends. We entered the haunted house, and from the start there was a lot of screaming and intensity. The actors were really good but intense, and it was starting to give me anxiety. I was starting to realize how not okay I was, and how much of a mistake getting high was. One of the haunted house actors must have realized how scared and quiet I looked, and he chose to get in my face trying to scare me, yelling and making noises. I'm not gonna lie, I was starting to internally freak out, but I was trying to keep it together in front of my friends. This haunted house was going on for what felt like forever, and in my condition, every single jump scare made me almost shit my pants. All the flashing lights and fog really made this whole experience even more trippy and surreal. We came to this room lit up with an eerie red glow, with a bloodied man dressed as a guy in a suit and top hat yelling at us, part of the act. But behind him, in the corner of the room, was a guy who wasn't dressed as anything. He was just standing there looking at me, into my soul. And as I realized I was looking at the face of my father, I let out a scream straight from my stomach, as I felt every hair in my body stand up. The room went silent, and my friends looked at me laughing at first, thinking I was joking around. But when they saw I was serious, one of the girls grabbed me and asked what's wrong. I said it's my dad. I pointed to the corner where there was now no one standing. I remember all my friends and the actor being confused, and everyone could tell I was not messing around. My friends knew about my troubled past. "There's no one there," one of my friends said. The actor apparently asked my friends if I was okay. I was now in the middle of a full-on panic attack, yelling, "I want to leave, I want to leave." Noah left with me through a side exit, and he sat with me while our friends finished the attraction. It wasn't cheap, so I wasn't going to make them all come out with me. As we sat outside the place, Noah told me I shouldn't have smoked so much, as he tried to assure me that my dad wasn't in there. I was just hallucinating. So my father used to abuse my siblings and I. I'm the oldest, so I remember the most of it. He left us and our mom one day and never came back when I was 10. My close friends know about this, to a certain extent, so I didn't have to explain to Noah. When our friends were done, they met us at a Wendy's nearby where I was just trying to eat to help calm me down. I was embarrassed, but my friends didn't judge, thankfully. Not to my face, at least. I went home earlier than everyone else. I didn't want to spoil their nights. When I got home, I knocked out right away, I guess because of how drunk and high I was. That night I was having a nightmare about the scene at the haunted house, and my father, standing in the corner of the room, he was saying, "Wake up, Charlie." And I did wake up. I woke up in my dark room in the middle of the night to see my father, towering over my bed, looking down at me with his eyes open super wide. It was literally this towering, 9-foot-tall version of my father, bending down with his body contorting in an impossible way. When I saw it, it took me a few seconds for me to digest what I was looking at, and scream straight from my stomach again. My mom came rushing in and turned on the lights, and the apparition was gone. My heart was racing and my blood ran cold. I cried to my mom that I saw Dad. It was one of the most scarring nights of my adult life. I don't touch weed or any substances anymore besides light alcohol, and I'm never going to a haunted house attraction again after that. During COVID, I thought it would be fun to get a job at a local haunted house attraction. My friend Marissa was already working there, and she told me they were looking for new actors and actresses. She pulled some strings and got me a job after I met with the owner. There were multiple sections to the haunted house attraction, including 3 haunted houses and the haunted corn maze. On my first day on the job, there was some slight rehearsing my character and just demonstrating my acting skills to one of the supervisors who was on duty. My role for the night was assigned to be a damsel in distress, and this meant I was going to be tied to a pole and yelling at the guests to help me as they walked past me. Of course, all guests would be told before entering not to touch any of the actors or actresses, so they would know not to actually untie me when I'm screaming, "Help me." So before opening time, the supervisor/coordinator Jeremiah walked me to my post. Quite literally my post, because I'd be tied to a wooden post in the corn maze. I was honestly surprised that I actually had to be tied up and not just pretend. I asked how I would go to the bathroom and such. He said there would be short breaks between sessions. He also said there would be another supervisor nearby if I should need anything, which made me feel a little better. Once he walked away, I was left alone. There were a bunch of sound effects and scary ambiance loops echoing through the cornfield from the various speakers hidden throughout the maze. Pretty soon, a little air horn sounded in the distance, indicating that the attraction was open and to get into character. I was nervous but excited. Since I was more so in the middle of the corn maze, it wasn't until a few minutes passed that the first guest would be passing me. I started to put on my best performance as a damsel in distress, so I screamed and fake cried, begging everyone who passed for help, saying "He's coming back soon, untie me." Some people would play along and say things back, and I'd improvise responses in character. Everyone was wearing face masks because of COVID, so I couldn't see people's entire faces. Eventually, 2 male guests who looked to be in their 30s walked past looking at me, not saying a word. One of them slowed down as he just shot me this gaze with his big eyes that quite honestly creeped me out. They kept walking and disappeared further into the maze. This was around the time I was starting to realize there would be long gaps between guests sometimes. I could suddenly hear someone brushing through the crops nearby. I was wondering if it was a staff member. The guests weren't supposed to stray off the path. I turned completely around and saw two men emerging from the crops, towards the pole I was tied to, the same two men from before. Something wasn't right. I broke character and said, "You guys can't stray off the path." And then one of them laughed under their mask, and the two men started speaking in some other language, I think Russian. Then one of them walked back to the path, but in the opposite direction that the guests are supposed to go. He just started standing there, keeping watch it seemed, while the other one started to inappropriately grab me. I knew what was happening immediately, and I started screaming bloody murder, saying, "Help, this isn't part of the act." I called out things like I'm being assaulted, and moments later one of the supervisors emerged, seeing if I was okay. By then, the two men had already run away. I was untied and escorted out of the maze. I called my parents, and they insisted I just leave right now. I left, and Jeremiah and one of the other supervisors said I'd be paid for the night, and if I didn't want to come back, they'd understand, but to just keep them in the loop. I wish I could say it was over, though. On my drive home, I was extra cautious to make sure I wasn't being followed. I noticed halfway home that the same white car was behind me the whole time. I started making turns down random streets, and when the white car stayed behind me every single time, I knew I was being followed. I knew I had to find the nearest police precinct, so I typed in police station on Google Maps, and I started driving to it. They followed me the whole way until I pulled into the parking lot of the precinct. Then they kept driving. I never saw the car again. I sat in my car for 10 minutes before finally turning it back on and driving home, confirming every few seconds that I wasn't being followed. I didn't return to work at that haunted house attraction again. This happened 2 years ago on Halloween of 2023. I'm a 25-year-old male, but at the time of this story, I was 22. I had a long day of work due to a festival we had where we had parents bring their kids to the center for various activities, such as many different competitive games, a costume contest, trivia for candy, and a kids vs. parents dodgeball game. Overall, it was a very fun time, but it was definitely tiring. For context, I'm a community worker, so doing community events is pretty much what I do on a normal basis, but it's also draining if that makes sense. Anyway, after it was all done, I went home and was ready to call it a night. About an hour after I got home, it was around 6 something, my little sister called me. My sister, who I'll call Savannah, wanted me to take her and my nephew, who I'll call Jackson, trick-or-treating because neither our parents nor Jackson's parents felt like doing it. And as it usually goes, it fell on me to be the cool big brother to step in and make it happen. Savannah was 15 and Jackson was 11. Even though I wasn't feeling it at all, I got up, threw some clothes on, and headed to my parents' house to pick them up. Once I got there, I asked if they were ready, but Savannah was still finalizing her costume. She was dressed up as Raven from Teen Titans. She even had the white makeup on to give that ghostly appearance Raven usually has. Jackson was dressed as Sub-Zero from Mortal Kombat. Once Savannah was done, we got in the car and were on our way. I took them to a pretty busy neighborhood to make sure they got as much candy as possible. Upon arrival, we started going from house to house. Everyone we ran into was friendly and had plenty of treats to hand out. There was even one house where an older man gave them each a hot dog and a soda. He said every year for Halloween he doesn't hand out candy. He grills food instead because he'd rather give kids something with protein since it's good for the body. Honestly, we probably need more people like that. We passed a lot of other kids, and some gave compliments to Savannah and Jackson's costumes. I also saw some really cool costumes myself. Everyone in the area seemed to go all out. When we hit the last house for the night, we started walking back to the car. It was about a 10-minute walk since we had gone pretty far down the neighborhood. The neighborhood was less active now, and there weren't as many people out and about. That's why I got alarmed when I looked across the street and saw a person dressed in all black standing in a yard where there were no porch lights on. I'm surprised I even noticed them at all, but I tend to always pay attention to my surroundings. When I looked closer, it seemed like the person was wearing a hooded cloak with an all-black outfit and a mask because I couldn't see their face at all. I honestly couldn't tell if it was a man or a woman. Whoever it was, they appeared to be looking at us. I told Savannah and Jackson to stay close to me and said, "There's a suspicious person across the yard. Look, but don't stare." I said that so they could see who I was talking about without encouraging the person to approach or follow us. Jackson laughed and thought it was just someone trying to scare people walking by. Savannah, though, looked noticeably worried. Now, just to add some context, I was carrying a backpack with a Glock inside, and Savannah knew this, so when I told them to stay close, she probably realized I was being serious. Jackson was clueless. He's too young for me to tell him that I carry a real gun. As we were walking away, it looked like that person was still watching us, even though it was hard to tell in the dark. We were getting closer to the car when I suddenly heard heavy footsteps behind us, like boots hitting the concrete. I turned around and saw that same person again. Same outfit, all black, but this time I could see more clearly. They were wearing a tactical vest, tactical boots, and black pants tucked into the boots. They had on a full spandex mask that completely covered their face. That made the situation way more serious. When you see someone dressed like that, the first thing that comes to mind is that they're armed. He's following us, I thought. I whispered to Savannah and Jackson, "I need you both to listen very carefully. Do not stop walking and do not look back. The person I mentioned earlier is following us. They're behind us right now. The last thing we want is to alarm them or set them off, so just keep your composure and keep walking." I mainly looked at Jackson when saying this because he's younger and might not fully understand how serious this was. Savannah understood completely. We kept walking and did occasional glances behind us. The person stayed the same distance away but was still following. When we got to the car, they were still coming our way. That's when I decided to make a bold move. I pulled out my Glock and pointed it at the person. I asked why they're following us. The person raised their hands, as if they didn't expect me to do that, then slowly removed their mask. It was a woman, and she looked to be in her 30s. She took her mask off but didn't answer my question. She just stared at me blankly. I asked again, still pointing the gun, "Why are you following us?" What she said next made no sense. In an almost robotic tone, she said, "I'm an undercover cop. I was told there was a break-in, so I came to check it out. That's why I was standing outside that house. But when you looked at me funny, I assumed you were the one who did it. So it would be wise to lower that weapon, or I could have you arrested for threatening an officer of the law." I hesitated, but then lowered my gun. What else was I supposed to do? I didn't want to risk an arrest or ruin the kid's night, but her story didn't make any sense. She claimed she got word of a break-in, so why would she just stand outside facing away from the house? How did me looking at her funny make her think I was the one who did it? Why would I break into a house and then casually walk through the neighborhood? And why was she wearing a hooded cloak? All these questions were racing through my mind, so I asked her, "If you're undercover, why are you in tactical gear? Wouldn't that kind of give away that you're law enforcement? And what's the point of the cloak?" She didn't answer. She just stared at me again, but this time her expression changed. There was something malicious in her eyes, like she was irritated that I didn't believe her and was deciding what to do next. Jackson and Savannah stayed completely quiet through all of this. Then she smiled this creepy, unsettling smile and said, "If you didn't have that gun, this night would have ended a hell of a lot different for you." Right as she finished saying that, I noticed 4 figures suddenly emerge from between the houses walking toward us. All of them were wearing tactical gear, but without the cloak. I instantly told Savannah and Jackson to get in the car, keeping my eyes on the woman and the figures. Once I saw they were in, I got into and drove off. As I was leaving, the woman was still standing there smiling. The others, 3 men and 1 woman, were not smiling. They had blank, emotionless faces, like they didn't even have souls. It's hard to explain. The whole car ride back was silent. I'm sure the kids were in shock just like I was. I dropped them off, made sure they got in safely, then went home to process everything that happened. The thing I couldn't shake off was why they targeted us. The neighborhood was full of people walking around, so why us? I wish I could say it ended there, but it didn't. A few days later, I got a text from an unknown number. It was just a photo, no words. The picture was of my car, taken in the parking lot of my apartment complex. I contacted the police and told them everything that happened on Halloween night. They took the report, but they couldn't investigate unless a direct threat was made. Typical. Out of curiosity, and maybe stupidity, I went back to that same house where I first saw that woman. I knocked on the door, and a man in his 40s answered. I asked if they'd experienced a break-in on Halloween night. He looked confused and said no. He said he went to bed early because he had work the next morning and didn't notice anything strange. I told him what I saw, and he had no idea what I was talking about. I thanked him for his time and left. At that point, I already knew the undercover cop story was fake, but I wanted to do my own little investigation just to make sense of it. Whoever that woman and those people were somehow knew my phone number and where I lived. It makes me wonder, was that not a random encounter after all? Were they watching me for a while? Were they planning something that night, and my being armed threw them off? All those thoughts messed me up and made me feel paranoid for a long time. I had to go to therapy and install a Ring camera at my front door just to feel safe again. In case you're wondering, I haven't been contacted by any unknown numbers since. Nothing else has happened since that picture. 2 years later, I still think back on that night. Writing this out helps me a lot, and I'm trying to fully move on from it. But if there's one thing I want people to take away from this, it's to always watch your surroundings. You never know who might be watching you. It's easy to get caught up in something dangerous just for existing, so always stay safe and protected, because I can say with full confidence that being armed that night probably saved our lives. This happened when I was 12 years old. It was Halloween day, and my family was staying at a small family resort about an hour away from where we lived. My parents wanted to do something different that year instead of just walking around our neighborhood for trick-or-treating. The resort was holding a Halloween celebration that weekend with a bunch of activities, games, and even a haunted hayride. It wasn't a big place. It had maybe 10 cabins, a main lodge, a small lake, and a long open field where they set up hayrides and games. It was surrounded by woods on all sides. During the day, it looked normal, even kind of peaceful, but once it got dark, the woods looked black and creepy, and the resort felt a little too quiet. We checked in early that afternoon. I remember walking into the cabin and feeling excited because I could smell campfire smoke and candy apples in the air. Kids were running around in costumes even though it wasn't dark yet. My parents said the hayride was starting around 7 and there'd be games before that, so I went off to play while they unpacked. They had booths where you could toss rings over bottles for candy, a costume contest, and even a pumpkin carving area. Everything was decorated with orange lights and fake spiderwebs. I met another kid around my age there. His name was Ryan. He was wearing a skeleton costume and said he and his parents were staying in the next cabin over from ours. We played a few games together and got a good amount of candy. As it got closer to 7, we saw a crowd of families walking over to the hayride area. The tractor pulling the wagon was parked near a big barn, and they had hay bales lined up inside for people to sit on. There were maybe 20 of us who got on. The driver wore a scarecrow mask, and there were workers dressed like zombies who would jump out during the ride to scare people. The ride started out fun. It was dark by then, and they had torches lighting the dirt trail. The tractor moved slowly through the woods, and every now and then, someone in a costume would appear from behind a tree or run up to the wagon. Most people laughed or screamed and then laughed again. It felt like a normal Halloween attraction, but about halfway through, something made me uncomfortable. We were passing through a part of the trail that was darker than the rest. The tractor slowed down, and I looked toward the edge of the woods on my side. That's when I saw a man standing just outside the torchlight. He wasn't part of the hayride cast. I could tell that right away. He wasn't wearing a costume that fit the theme. From what I remember, he had a black jacket, jeans, and a baseball cap pulled low over his face. He was just standing there, not moving, with his hands in his pockets. At first, I thought maybe he was one of the workers taking a break, but he wasn't doing anything. He was only watching. At one point, I made eye contact with him, or at least I think I did. Even though his face was shadowed, I could feel his eyes locked on me. I turned to look at the people around me to see if anyone else noticed, but no one seemed to. When I looked back, he was still there, in the exact same position. I tried to ignore it for the rest of the ride, but I kept thinking about him. When the hayride ended and everyone got off, I looked back one more time toward the woods. He was gone. I didn't mention it to anyone right then. I figured maybe I imagined it or overreacted. We went back to the lodge where they had more games and food. My parents sat by a bonfire while Ryan and I went around collecting candy. Everything seemed normal again. About an hour later, I saw him again. Ryan and I were standing near the snack table when I noticed someone off to the side of the crowd. It was the same man. He wasn't close, maybe 30 feet away, but he was standing near the tree line, watching again. There were a lot of people around, so it felt strange that he'd just be standing there alone. I remember my stomach tightening when I realized he was looking in my direction. I tried to get a better look at his face, but it was hard because of the lighting. I could make out a short beard, and I think his hat had some kind of logo on it. I nudged Ryan and told him about the guy. Ryan looked over and said, "Maybe he's one of the workers." I said, "He's not. He was in the woods during the hayride." Ryan shrugged and said, "Maybe he's a dad." I wanted to believe that, but he wasn't talking to anyone, just standing there. A few minutes later, when I looked back again, he was gone. Around 9 o'clock, if I had to guess, most of the little kids had gone back to their cabins. The event was winding down, but Ryan and I still had energy. We decided to walk around the resort before going in. There was a trail behind the cabins that led into the woods. Ryan said we should go a little way in to do something scary for Halloween before the night ended. I didn't want to go too far, but we had flashlights and I didn't want to look like a coward. So we walked down the dirt path together, laughing and daring each other to keep going. The farther we went, the quieter it got. The sounds from the resort faded until it was just the crunching of our shoes on the path. We only went maybe 200 feet in when we stopped near a clearing. There was an old wooden sign nailed to a tree that said "Private Property." We started throwing small rocks at the sign and pretending to summon ghosts or something dumb like that. Then we both heard it. Footsteps. Heavy, slow footsteps coming from behind us, somewhere deeper on the path. We froze and turned around. Ryan whispered, "Probably another kid." But it didn't sound like a kid. Whoever it was walked with weight, like an adult. I shined my flashlight down the path. The light only went so far, and I couldn't see anyone yet. Then the footsteps stopped. For a few seconds, it was completely silent. Then a voice spoke. It said, "Hey there, boys." It was a man's voice, calm but somehow intimidating. Ryan looked at me, and I think he realized the same thing I did. It was the man from the hayride. He stepped into the light just enough for us to see part of him. Same black jacket and hat. "What are you two doing out here?" he asked. "You like candy?" Neither of us said anything. He pulled something out of his pocket and held it up. I could see the orange wrapper. It was a Reese's cup. "I got a bunch more of these in my cabin," he said. "Come on, I'll give you some." Ryan took a step back. I remember his face going pale. The man took a few steps closer and then said, "You don't have to be scared. It's Halloween, I'm just giving candy out. I saw you boys on the hayride earlier." When he said that, my stomach basically dropped. I grabbed Ryan's arm and whispered, "Run." We both turned and sprinted down the path toward the resort. I could hear him behind us for a second. His footsteps were pounding hard as he started to chase. I didn't dare look back. My heart was beating so hard it hurt. The path seemed longer than before. When we reached the edge of the woods, I could finally see the lights from the resort again. I yelled for help as we ran out of the trees and back toward the crowd near the bonfire. A few adults turned toward us, startled. We didn't stop until we got right up to the people. I turned around, expecting to see the man behind us, but he wasn't there. The path was empty. My parents came over right away, asking what happened. I told them everything, about the man watching me on the hayride, seeing him near the trees, and then following us into the woods. Ryan confirmed it all. My dad and another man grabbed flashlights and went to check the path, but they didn't find anyone. A few workers searched too, but he was gone. The resort staff called the local police to report what happened. They arrived about 30 minutes later and took statements from me, Ryan, and our parents. They said they'd check the area and notify nearby cabins to keep an eye out. That night, my parents didn't let me out of their sight. We stayed in the cabin with the door locked. I couldn't fall asleep for hours. Every noise outside made me jump. The next morning, the police came back and told us they searched the property but didn't find anyone matching the description. No vehicles had been reported missing, and no one fitting that man's description had checked in. They thought maybe it was a trespasser from outside the resort. We left later that day. I remember staring out the car window as we drove past the woods, half expecting to see him standing there again. For weeks after that, I kept thinking I saw him, on the side of the road, outside stores, even once at my school parking lot, but it was always someone else. Or at least, I hope it was. Ryan and I kept in touch for a while. He told me he couldn't sleep for days after it happened. Nothing ever came of this. The police never called again. The man was never identified or caught. Now I'm older, and when I think about that night, what scares me isn't what he did, it's what he could have done. If we had believed him for even a second, if we had walked toward him instead of running, I don't think I'd be here to tell this story. And every Halloween since then, whenever I see someone standing alone at the edge of a crowd, I always think of that man. Sometimes people who look like they're part of the fun are watching for a different reason. My name is Roger, and this happened to me on Halloween night 3 years ago. I'm 29 and work a boring office job, but it's good pay. When this happened, I was getting stuck with the stuff. Beginner's time off, the shifts nobody wanted, etc. So when Halloween, my favorite holiday, rolled around, I was actually quite excited. It was never easy being the new guy at work, so I was wanting to enjoy a night of seeing kids be kids and chilling out at home watching movies. At the time, I was living alone in a small house on the outskirts of town with my girlfriend, but she was out of town with her parents. It wasn't isolated exactly. I had neighbors, but the street got really quiet once the trick-or-treating hours ended. The families in the area usually shut their lights off around 9 p.m. Since I didn't have kids, I just handed out candy until the crowd died down. On several past Halloweens, before I got my own place, I was quite used to the occasional ding-dong ditch prank. That's why there is a trick and treat here and there. That year, Halloween fell on a Saturday, and I remember it was chilly but clear out. By 10:30, I was lounging on my couch, half watching a horror movie while picking through a bowl of leftover candy. I hadn't seen anyone in about an hour, so when I heard a faint knock at my side door, I assumed it was stragglers. But when I opened the door, no one was there. Just the empty driveway and the faint rustling of leaves. I brushed it off. Kids play pranks all the time on Halloween. I headed back to my living room to finish watching The Conjuring 2. 15 minutes later, I heard the same sound again, only this time it was coming from the back door, the one that led to the small deck. That set off alarms in my head because nobody used that entrance. I froze in the living room, listening. The TV was off now, and I could hear it clearly. The metal rattle of the back doorknob being tested, slowly and cautiously. Whoever was trying my door was either checking if it was locked cautiously or believed it was unlocked and trying to be quiet. I crept into the kitchen, staying low, and that's when I saw him through the window. A man was crouched down near the door, wearing dark clothes and a cheap, cracked Halloween mask pushed up on top of his head. In his hand, he held a crowbar. He wasn't trying to hide. He was deliberate and calm, like he knew I was inside and didn't care. I backed away quietly and grabbed my phone, whispering to 911 what was happening. The operator told me to stay on the line, lock myself somewhere safe, and not to engage. I didn't want to make noise by slamming the doors upstairs, so I stayed crouched at the top of the steps, clutching a kitchen knife, whispering updates. I peeked down and saw the man move away from the back door. That's when I heard the faint pop of a window screen being pried off. He was at the basement window now. I whispered to the dispatcher, "He's at the basement." My voice was shaking. She told me officers were already on their way. Then came the worst moment. I heard glass crack. He was breaking the window. My blood ran cold, and it wasn't just a smash and grab. He knew I was there, and most burglars typically don't try to enter a home where they know someone's still inside. Minutes felt like hours. The dispatcher kept me talking quietly to make sure I was still okay. I heard footsteps crunching outside. The man was circling the house again. Then, headlights swept across the blinds. Relief flooded me as flashing red and blue lights pulled up in front. The man bolted. I watched him sprint across my yard, but he didn't get far. The officers tackled him just past my driveway. I didn't even realize I was shaking until I saw one of the cops leading him back in cuffs. That's when I saw what he'd been carrying: the crowbar, duct tape, and zip ties stuffed in his bag. This wasn't a burglar looking for valuables. This guy had a plan, and it was something far worse. The police told me he had a long record of breaking into homes, and that he was suspected in some other cases where people had gone missing. To this day, I hate being home alone on Halloween. It's supposed to be about scares and fun, but whenever I hear footsteps or knocking outside at night, I can't help but remember everything about this night. The part that chills me the most is if the police had been just 5 minutes later, I might not be here to tell the story. The police later followed up weeks later. They told me what they found in his backpack. He had a Colt .45 handgun, several kitchen knives, and rope. Breakups are tough, even when you know they're for the best. I'd been trying to keep myself together after splitting up with my boyfriend of 2.5 years. I don't really want to get into it. It wasn't messy or dramatic. We just weren't right for each other anymore, but that didn't make it any easier. Some days, it felt like everything reminded me of him. I'd been forcing myself to stick to no contact, telling myself that it was the healthiest way for both of us to move on. It was hard though, really hard. One of the things I missed most about us was playing pool together. It was our thing. I'm a pretty decent player, definitely better than average, but my ex, he was incredible on his good days. He could pull off trick shots like it was nothing. 1-rail, 2-rail banks, kicks, combinations. I'm pretty sure he was even learning a standard mass. We each had pool tables at home, but obviously we're young, and staying inside every night wasn't exactly ideal. When we did go out, we always made sure that wherever we were going, usually a bar, had some pool tables. We hated crowded bars with long waits for tables and screaming patrons though, so the places we went were quieter, usually attracting an older crowd. Dive bars with old, scuffed tables and sticky floors were our sweet spot. Obviously, you can't expect to find a regulation table in pristine condition at any bar, but the dive bars were definitely a better shout than rowdy college bars. We were usually the youngest people there, but we didn't care. At that point in our relationship, we had grown somewhat bored of the typical college, let's get plastered every night mentality. Plus, even though I'm kind of shy, my ex was pretty charismatic and would get along with anyone. Us not being total newbies at pool didn't hurt either. A few weeks ago, I found myself missing that part of my life more than usual. It was a random Wednesday though, so none of my friends were free. I didn't want to sit around the house feeling sorry for myself anymore, so I decided to head out to one of the bars we used to go to. I told myself it wasn't about nostalgia, that I just needed to get out. Believe me, I'm not the type of person, nor do I usually have the confidence to go out myself, but I was feeling some type of way that night. The bar was exactly the same as I remembered. Dim lighting, worn out stools, a jukebox in the corner. The familiarity was comforting, but it also stung. The memories came flooding back, and I almost turned around and left right then, but I forced myself to stay. After grabbing a few drinks, I wandered over to one of the pool tables and started idly chalking a cue. I'm not really sure what I was planning on doing there. Playing alone would have been a little odd. Luckily, my question was answered because a guy walked over. He was maybe in his mid-20s, the only person in the room even close to my age. He leaned against the table and asked if I was up for a game. I nodded and told him to rack him up. He put some money in the slot and started racking the balls. I laughed to myself as he racked them wrong, but I didn't say anything. We played a few rounds, and I started to relax. He wasn't bad, not as good as my ex, but not terrible. I wasn't going easy on him though. I won every rack we played. We chatted as we played, and he even bought me a couple of drinks. He was friendly enough, but it quickly became clear he wasn't the brightest guy in the world. I like sharp and quick-witted guys who can hold their own in a conversation. This guy, not so much. Still, I didn't mind. It felt good to just play and talk and not overthink things for once. I was having a good time. After the fourth game, he popped the question, asking if I wanted to go back to his place. The question caught me off guard, but I guess I couldn't have been too shocked. I froze for a second before shaking my head. I tried to make it playful, saying he'd need a second date for that. In all honesty, I just didn't want to move so quickly. I guess I wouldn't have been totally opposed to taking things further with him, but a random Wednesday night wasn't the time for that. I guess I didn't do a good job turning him down though, because his entire demeanor changed. His smile dropped, and he literally started scowling at me. I was not prepared for what happened next. He said, "Are you serious?" and grabbed my wrist, saying something about spending all that money on those drinks. Before I could respond, he snatched my purse too. I had never been in a situation like that, so instead of screaming or fighting, I just kind of froze up. Even though we were in a public place, I was still terrified. Luckily, a couple of older guys at the bar noticed what was happening and stepped in. I'm honestly not sure what I would have done had they not. One of them told the guy to let me go. The guy glared at me, muttered something under his breath, and threw my purse back onto the table before storming right out of the bar. My heart was still racing, and I thanked those guys profusely for helping me out. That was it for me though. I called an Uber and left the bar, still kind of shocked and trying to process what had just happened. I decided to close my eyes in the Uber. I must have fallen asleep because the next thing I remember is the Uber driver gently waking me up. We were parked across the street from my house. I thanked him, got out of the car, and started walking toward the door. As I rummaged through my bag for my keys, I impulsively checked my phone for the first time since leaving the bar. That's when I saw it. That god-awful notification, AirTag found moving with you. I nearly dropped my phone. My hands started to shake as I rummaged through my purse, tossing aside my wallet and makeup until my fingers brushed against something unfamiliar. I pulled it out and stared in disbelief. There was literally an AirTag in my bag. A wave of panic hit me, way worse than what I was feeling earlier. I was still standing in the middle of the street, so I threw it on the ground and stomped on it a bunch of times until I was sure it was broken. I fought back a scream and started breathing heavily. The cold wasn't helping. I needed to get inside. I looked around frantically, but the street was completely empty. Whoever had planted the AirTag, probably that guy from the bar, would know exactly where I was. Maybe not my exact house, but the street for sure. The houses on my street are large and spaced out, so he'd definitely be able to narrow it down. I grabbed my purse and sprinted to the back door, fumbling with the lock before finally getting inside. I slammed the door behind me and locked it, my heart pounding so hard it felt like it might burst. I was safe, but I couldn't stop shaking. I walked up to my room, wondering how I had gotten myself into this mess. Normally I'm asleep by 10 and out cold for 9 or 10 hours, but there was no way I was going to sleep that night. I looked out my bedroom window, thinking maybe the scenery would lull me to sleep or something. As I was looking out the window, kind of mindlessly, I noticed an old, beat-up Lincoln drive slowly past my house. Nothing too unusual, but it was kind of late for cars to be driving on a residential road. But then it came back from the opposite direction, and I knew something was wrong. It passed even slower the second time, like the driver was scanning the houses. I didn't want to face the reality of the situation, but when it passed a third time, I had no choice. It was the guy. It had to be. He was trying to find my house. I wanted to scream again. The next time the car passed, the driver's side window was rolled halfway down. I wanted to call the police, but I didn't want that guy to know he was in the right area. I know that doesn't make any sense, but I was so scared and couldn't think straight. The next time the car passed, the driver's hand was hanging out of the window, holding something. It looked like a knife. And then, instead of driving past, the car stopped in the middle of the road, right across from my house. I ducked down, my heart beating a million beats a minute again. I stayed there, crouched below the window, too terrified to move. By the time I looked up, the car was gone. I waited for what must have been an hour, but it didn't come back. The next morning, I told my parents everything. My dad scolded me for not calling the police, but I told him I was too scared to. He called a buddy of his, a police chief, to ask for advice. His friend said there wasn't much they could do without more evidence or the car's plate number, which I hadn't been able to see. His friend told us to call the police immediately should we ever see that car again. I didn't leave the house for days. Even now, I'm really scared that he's waiting somewhere and he's gonna see me enter or exit my house again. I haven't seen the car since though, so maybe the nightmare is over. I don't have the most exciting life, but it's comfortable. I'm 40, single, no kids. Some people might find that depressing, but honestly, I don't mind. I've got a steady job, a decent house, and no one to answer to but myself. I work as a bartender at a high-end luxury rooftop in a neighboring town, catering to the kind of clientele who think regular bars are beneath them. I don't live anywhere near that level of luxury myself. My place is in a pretty middle-of-the-pack neighborhood, about 20 minutes away, but working there has its perks. The tips are amazing. People in that area aren't shy about throwing money around, and the rotating crowd keeps things interesting. Since the bar is upscale, we don't have the typical regulars you find in a dive. I like that. I never quite liked how close some customers would get with me, or any other bartender for that matter. Maybe that's just me though. I like to keep to myself. I should probably mention that my name's Kevin. That'll be important later. It was a Friday night, our busiest night. The place was packed as usual, with groups of friends clinking glasses, couples on date nights, and a few folks who probably wandered in just to feel important. I always like playing a mental game with my patrons. I try to figure out which ones are pretending to be something they're not. You can tell a lot about people by the way they order a drink. The ones who ask for complicated cocktails are usually trying to impress someone. The ones who order a whiskey neat, they've had a day. I had my eye on a couple at the end of the bar who were down to their last sips of wine. It's always better to offer a refill before they wave you down. I was in my groove, mixing drinks and chatting with customers, when I noticed someone walk in who definitely looked out of place. I clocked the guy immediately. He was clenching his teeth and scowling like he was furious. He had jet black hair that wasn't combed and sat like a bird's nest on his forehead. He was wearing a blank black hoodie under a faded leather jacket, which looked like it hadn't been cleaned in years. There were stains all over it, but none of that was as unsettling as his face. Like I said, he just looked so angry. He made a beeline for the bar, but he didn't sit down. He just stood there, staring at me. I wondered to myself how he had gotten past the doorman in the lobby. I cleared my throat and asked if I could get him something to drink, trying to keep my tone neutral despite the weird vibe he was giving off. He didn't answer right away, which was strange. He just kept glaring at me like he was getting ready to swing. Finally, he muttered that he wanted a double shot of Jaeger. I nodded, grabbed a glass, and poured the shot. Jaeger isn't a drink we pour often here. Most of our patrons are likely to ask for something a little higher quality. But hey, if someone wants Jaeger, I'm not about to question their taste. I set the glass in front of him and moved on to serve a few other patrons. When I came back to charge him, he tossed crumpled cash onto the counter. That also threw me off. Hardly anyone pays in cash at this place. Again, though, it wasn't my place to judge. The guy didn't say anything as I rang him up, and I was ready to move on when he spoke again. I still remember his exact words. "I knew I'd find you here, Kevin." I froze. My eyes snapped to his as I scrambled to process what he just said. I put the glass in my hand down and demanded to know how he knew my name. I didn't want to make a scene, so I kept my voice low, but I hoped he got the gist of how serious I was. He didn't answer my question, just stared at me with the same angry intensity. Finally, he said, "I know what you did." Before I could ask him what he meant, he turned and walked towards the elevators. I wanted to yell something or chase after him, but I decided against it. I was on the clock. I couldn't just neglect my job. Instead, I just stood there for a moment, completely thrown off. I was honest to God confused out of my mind. I didn't recognize him in the slightest. I couldn't think of anything I had done that would warrant such a cryptic statement. I'm no saint, but I don't go around making enemies. It put me in a sour mood for the rest of the night. When my shift finally ended, I drove home, but I couldn't stop thinking about what had happened earlier. I racked my brain for literally any explanation that made sense, but couldn't think of any. By the time I ended up going to bed, I was still relatively unsettled by the whole thing. Sometime in the middle of the night, I woke up randomly. I wasn't really sure what woke me up, as I didn't have to go to the bathroom and I'm usually the type of person to sleep through the night. I didn't hear or see anything, but something felt off. Without moving, I kept my eyes open, waiting for them to adjust to the darkness. After about a minute, I saw something that gave me an adrenaline rush of fear. There was a dark mass in the corner of my room, next to the door. It was just standing there, but I was 100% sure it was something that didn't belong in my room. I felt my heart start to race, but I forced myself to stay still, pretending to still be asleep. Someone was in my room. I repeated that thought to myself like 6 times before truly processing it. I knew I had to do something. I counted silently to 3, and in one quick motion, I sprung out of bed, screaming like a crazy person. I was prepared for a fight, but the figure didn't come toward me. Instead, he bolted for the door. As he moved, I heard something clatter to the floor. I chased after him through my house, but by the time I reached the front door, it was wide open, and whoever had been in my room was gone. I wanted to run out into the yard to look for him, but I was worried that I'd be walking directly into a trap. Instead, I made what I still think is the smart decision and slammed the door shut and locked it. I thought back to the clatter I had heard earlier in my room. I walked back to my bedroom, turned on the light, and froze. In the corner of the room, there was a knife, just laying there on the floor. It was one of mine, taken from the kitchen. I felt sick. Whoever I had just chased was planning to hurt me, possibly kill me. I called the police right after that, and they quickly arrived and searched both my house and my yard, but found nothing. I gave a description of the man from the bar, and the police got the video footage from my bar, but they haven't been able to find him yet because I haven't heard anything. The thing that freaks me out the most is that I know for a fact I had locked all my doors that night. I locked them every night. During their search, though, the police were never able to figure out how that man entered my house. None of the windows were broken or unlocked, and there was no sign of forced entry. To this day, I still have no idea how he got inside. I haven't seen him since, but I would be lying if I said I don't think about this encounter often. I work as a bartender at a bar and restaurant in a suburb just outside Baltimore. I'll do my best to explain the layout so the story makes sense. It's a busy place with a unique setup. There are no waiters, just bartenders like me and the cooks in the back. If you want to find food or non-alcoholic drinks, you have to order them at the bar, and when everything's ready, you grab it from the counter. I'm not sure why things are done that way, but I guess it had something to do with management being cheap and trying to avoid hiring waiters. Either way, it keeps things fast-paced, which I actually like. For whatever reason, the place is really popular, even though I personally don't think it's anything super special. The atmosphere is lively most nights, with great music, a buzzing crowd, and a standing area near the DJ booth where people gather to dance and chat. The constant flow of customers and the high-energy vibe make the job fly by. I love meeting and talking to new people, so the gig is perfect for me. I would probably lose my mind if I had to wait long periods of time between serving guests, but that's just me. I bet some people are the opposite. That particular night started off like any other. It was a weekend, so things were going to be super busy. I was ready. After a certain time, the bar started filling up with people. It looked like more of a younger college crowd that night, which meant more dancing, more spilling, and a rowdier environment in general. Oh yeah, and worse tips, which kind of sucked for me. This one group of kids just kept on ordering round after round of tequila shots faster than I could line up the salt and limes. It's always chaos when they take over the bar. One of them was so plastered he used the same pickup line on me like 3 times. I was running around doing my thing when I noticed an elderly couple walk in and sit down at the booth in the corner of the restaurant. At first glance, there was nothing strange about them. I just thought it was interesting that 2 people that age would want to come into a rowdy place like this. I didn't have too much time to think about it though, so I went back to work. Fast forward maybe 30 minutes to an hour. I was halfway through pouring a line of gin and tonics when I noticed the couple again. My hands kept working, muscle memory taking over, but my brain was stuck on them for some reason. That's when it hit me. They were just sitting there motionlessly. They hadn't ordered anything either. No food and definitely not any drinks, I would have remembered. I looked a little closer and realized that they weren't even looking at each other. They were both fixated at the wall next to them. From what I could tell, it didn't look like they were talking either. It was the strangest thing. I was beyond curious, but the bar was slammed, and I had too much to do to spend time wondering about it. I figured they might be waiting for someone, or didn't realize how the place worked. Maybe they were waiting for a waiter to take their order. When I finally had a break, I decided to check on them myself. I walked over to the table and put on my most polite smile. As I approached, neither of them turned to face me. They were both still staring at the wall like statues. I cleared my throat and asked them if they wanted anything to eat or drink. The woman didn't even flinch. She kept staring at the wall like I hadn't spoken at all. The man turned his head slowly, like he was moving in slow motion. When his face came into view, I felt a chill run through me. His skin was pale and wrinkled, and his eyes were almost sunken into his face completely. He didn't speak, just stared at me and shook his head once, firmly but silently. Something about the way he looked at me made my stomach twist. I muttered something in response and quickly returned to the bar. I had the weirdest feeling in my gut after that. Those people looked like they didn't even belong in this century, let alone this bar. I didn't look over at that booth for a long time. Eventually, things started to die down a little, and I remembered the couple. I glanced over impulsively, and I nearly dropped the glass I was holding. Both of them were staring directly at me now. I made direct eye contact with the woman, but she never averted her gaze. I don't think I'd ever been more uncomfortable at my job than I was in that moment. I looked away and pretended to be busy, trying not to freak out completely. By the time I glanced back again, the booth was empty. I was relieved. I was just glad that they were gone, as mean as that sounds. By the end of the night, I was still thinking about the whole thing. As I wiped down the bar and closed up with my coworker Karen, I decided to ask her if she saw anything strange. She's, I guess, what you would call a vet. She's been working there for years and prides herself on noticing everything and everyone that comes through the doors. When I asked her about the couple, she gave me a confused look and said she didn't know what I was talking about. I looked at her blankly and told her I was talking about the elderly couple that was sitting in the corner booth. She shook her head and told me she didn't remember seeing anyone like that. She then jokingly asked me if I was hallucinating, which got a playful laugh out of me, but on the inside though, I was losing it. I knew what I had seen. I asked her if she was sure, and she crossed her arms before listing at least 10 random people who had ordered food that night and what they were wearing. I laughed again and complimented her memory, but like I said before, I was dying on the inside. By the time we locked up, I started doubting myself. As I walked to my car, I noticed something that made me nearly drop my keys in fear. Across the street, there were 2 dark figures standing under a lone streetlight. I knew it was them. I wanted to scream, but the sound wouldn't come. I didn't wait another second. I jumped into my car, locked the doors, and sped out of the lot without another look. The drive home was awful. I was trying not to break down the whole time. I just kept repeating, "Oh my God," over and over. I had so many questions. Had Karen somehow missed them? Were those people even real? Was I going insane? I couldn't explain it. I thought I was going crazy. I wish this story had a resolved ending, but it doesn't. I never saw those people again. I never got any kind of explanation. I don't think I ever will. I take my dog Hemi for a walk twice a day and let him in the yard once. When I take him for a walk around the neighborhood, I always try to take different routes just to keep it from getting repetitive, not just for me, but for Hemi as well. Oftentimes on the weekends, I take him for longer walks since I have more free time, and I don't have the stress of other work-related things still lingering in my mind. On a cloudy, humid Saturday evening, it was one of those times that I decided to take him on a long walk. I'm talking like almost an hour. We were in a part of the neighborhood I wasn't too familiar with. I found a walking trail that was part of the town's huge nature preserve. It was a rather low-key path. There didn't seem to be any other people on it but me. It was a rather narrow path with woods on either side. It wasn't a cement bike path like the other trails in the preserve. Hemi led the way, pulling the leash harder than usual, probably excited by all the new random smells he was picking up. Eventually on the trail, we passed this little square park. It had a swing set and little playground, along with a basketball court, or rather what was once a basketball court, as there were no hoops. I decided to walk in through the little opening, as Hemi was going crazy over something. I was planning on just sitting on one of the benches facing the playground to take a break because I was getting a little tired, but when I sat down, Hemi kept pulling and started barking at something. He'd only really do that when he saw another dog or animal, sometimes people, but less often. So I entertained it and got up and started giving him slack to run towards whatever he thought he saw. I looked into the woods but couldn't see anything. The closer we got, the more aggressive Hemi got, until he was basically choking himself with the collar trying to pull me into the woods. Then out popped a man from behind a big tree. He was laughing and saying, "Whoa, whoa, he caught me." I told Hemi to calm down and pulled him away from the woods. And the man. I apologized for my dog and walked away, as the way in which he came out from that tree was bizarre. He said, "It's all good, dude," as he seemed to follow in the direction we were walking. Hemi kept looking back and barking. I continued to tug him forward. Eventually, I had to turn around and ask if there was something I could help him with, as he even seemed to follow me outside of the park and onto the trail. He put his arms up in the air and smiled. Then he said he just wants to pet my dog. I said, "Nah, he doesn't like you, man. We're just gonna walk our own way." He didn't reply, so I turned and continued walking, faster now. Hemi kept turning around and growling, and every time I'd look back, he'd be the same distance away from me, kind of off the trail a bit, half hiding behind the trees like he thought he was being slick. I was about to call back at him to piss off, but then it hit me this guy might be dangerous. I started running down the trail until I came to the little opening we entered from and exited through that. Back on the streets, Hemi would keep looking back as we ran, but I'd have to tug him to keep running. We ran all the way back to my house without stopping. I actually do cardio regularly, so I wasn't concerned about that guy keeping up. I highly doubted it, especially since Hemi stopped looking back eventually. It was now a couple hours after getting back. Hemi was in his bed, which was right next to mine, when he unexpectedly lifted his head to look at the window, and he growled. At first I thought it was because of the sound of the rain droplets that had just begun to hit the outside of the window. I was thinking about getting up out of bed to close the window, even though I was already comfortable in bed. Then it happened. A voice speaking into the window. A voice I recognized from a few hours ago, asking if I knew why he was in the woods. Hemi started going crazy. I jumped in my skin and turned to the window. I couldn't see his features or face, but I could see the outline of his body at my window. I yelled, "What do you want?" He calmly asked if I saw what he was doing in the woods. I told him no, and he asked me, "Are you sure?" I said yes with a tremble in my voice. He said okay, and I saw the outline of his body move away from the window. Hemi stopped growling after a few moments. I closed the window and latched it. I wouldn't have been able to sleep that night without calling the police. I told them I was followed by someone in the park, and that he came to my window. The dispatcher asked if the man left, and I told her to my knowledge, yes. She said if he were to come back, to call 911 again. She implied it was a busy night since it was a Saturday. I did feel comfort knowing Hemi would give me a warning at least if he were to come back. He didn't end up coming back though, thank God. The man's words, "Did you see what I was doing in the park?" still don't really make sense to me. I wonder if you were implying he was doing something he didn't want others to see, and that he was worried I witnessed it. But that alone would raise even more questions. It was a regular night in the summer of 2010. I was taking my dog Poppy out for his nighttime walk. I usually take the same route. Sometimes I'll stray down one different block, not always though. This one night, I branched off a familiar block to a not-so-familiar one. All that I knew of this block was that there was an abandoned house on the corner. It's known as the Murder House. I've only ever passed it while driving. The first time I saw it, I slowed down just because it's such an eyesore, sticking out like a sore thumb from the rest of the houses. I never could understand why the town wouldn't just tear it down and build a new home, especially given the house's history. The reason no one ever bought it was because of the murder of a young woman inside, potentially by her boyfriend. He was never to be heard of again. No body, no signs of leaving, nothing. Walking down the block, I saw the house slowly getting closer. I already planned on stopping in front of it to take a look, but Poppy actually stopped before I even did and just looked at the house. I could tell by his ears and his head tilting that he was engaged by something. I looked around the neighboring houses, which were spaced out generously, and our neighborhood has a lot of green, meaning tons of bushes and trees lining the streets. Plus, it was as dark as could get out, and the house was conveniently situated in a gap between the streetlights. It didn't seem like any of the neighbors could possibly be watching me from where I was, so I started walking onto the grass of the property, but Poppy stayed in place. He started to growl and make whimpering type sounds, like he was frustrated. I pulled him hard enough, and he started to follow onto the property. He was fixated on a window that was opened. I stepped onto the house-length front wooden deck and walked to the window. Poppy was still making growling and whimpering sounds. I pressed my face up to the screen of the window, surprised the window was even left open. I started to wonder if maybe someone was still managing this house in some way, whatever that would even mean. Inside the house was dark, but not pitch black. I could see the walls to the empty living room, and then the opening in the wall that led to a back room with another window. As I was observing, I heard the sound of something inside the house, like a blunt object hitting the floor. It came from further back in the house, like in that back room. Having my dog with me gave me some kind of weird confidence boost to go through the side of the backyard. The backyard was literally huge. The grass was very tall, indicating I was likely wrong about any kind of property management. Only thing in the big yard was an old wooden decrepit-looking shed in the corner. The door to it was slightly open, but I was more curious about looking in through that window. As I looked inside, I couldn't see anything except an empty black room, probably what was once a mud room. Poppy was looking at the shed, not barking or growling though. He was kinda silent. I walked quietly towards the shed, tugging him slowly and softly to keep him quiet too. The door was open enough for me to look inside the giant shed. It was not empty. There weren't tools or bicycles or anything. There was just this skinny girl standing in the middle of the otherwise empty shed. I say girl, but I couldn't tell if it was just a girl or a woman. Poppy suddenly went ballistic, barking and making these noises I could only describe as a dog's version of screaming. He wasn't pulling to go inside of the shed, he was pulling to get away. The girl's head inside the shed turned to the door and I ran. We ran. Poppy and I ran for 3 straight blocks until I was out of breath. Then we walked the rest of the way back to my house. I went to a house nicknamed Murder House, where a young woman was killed potentially by her boyfriend, and then I witnessed a young woman standing in the middle of that empty shed. I don't know if I believe it was an apparition, or just some girl by chance trying to explore that abandoned house just like me. I was 10 when my parents let my brothers and I get our first dog. I'm the middle sibling, and it was always my older brother and I's job to walk the dog. Our dog's name was Nyla. Nyla was a golden retriever. My brother would walk her in the afternoon after school, and I would walk her at night. I don't remember anything about what kind of night it was. Cold, warm, weeknight, weekend, nothing. All the details I remember are what I'm including in my recounting of this experience. I was like halfway through my walk with Nyla when she looked across the street and her tail started wagging. She started barking and tugging to go say hi to this dog that was being walked by a man across the street. The man made the decision for the both of us to cross the street and allow our dogs to say hi. His dog was a very tiny, fluffy dog. I think it might have been a Maltese. His dog seemed very timid and like he didn't want to be bothered by Nyla. The man asked my name and I gave it to him, and he told me his name. I don't remember it honestly, but we got into this long conversation about our dogs. He really seemed to like Nyla, and Nyla kinda liked him. He was telling me how his golden retriever had recently passed away and he had a bunch of toys and dog supplies that he'd love to give me. I figured, why not? It's my lucky day. He said his house was around the block, so he led the way. I was walking kind of next to him though as we walked. We were in the street the rest of the way back, but the residential roads are usually quiet. After kind of awkwardly walking back to his house, he let me in first. His house was okay, modest, nothing special. He led Nyla and I into the kitchen as he let his dog go run off into a different room. He asked me to have a seat on one of the stools by the island in the kitchen and asked if I wanted anything to eat. He offered me a bag of chips and I accepted it. He handed me a bag of some off-brand potato chips. Then he just sat on the stool next to mine and started petting Nyla. He was awfully close to me, and then he looked down at the bag of chips, I think, as if he were waiting for me to open it. I put it on the island in front of me. He just sat there petting Nyla and not saying much. I was wondering when he was going to get the dog supplies he promised. He didn't show any signs of doing that though. Instead, he was asking me personal questions, making awkward small talk with me. At one point I remember he even patted my knee as if he were my father or something. I remember an overwhelming feeling of discomfort suddenly, so I finally asked about the collar, toys, and other supplies he mentioned. He said he'd be right back and go get it. He said it, not them. I remember picking up on that. He left through one of the 2 doorways in the kitchen. Then I heard him stomping downstairs to the basement. Moments later, I heard him call up to me to come downstairs and check out some of the stuff he wanted to give me. I got up just to walk over to the basement door, still deciding if I'd want to go down. But then Nyla started growling at something behind the open basement door. I looked. There was someone crouched down in the dark hallway. I didn't really know what to think, but I just left the house in a hurry. I got home and didn't say anything to my family. I just went to my room the rest of the night, quiet and shooken up. It was the first and only time I ever felt I was about to be targeted for being a young age. My only explanation was there were 2 men in that house, and the second I'd walk into that basement, the other would have shut the door on me. I didn't tell any of my family about it simply because it made me uncomfortable and honestly slightly embarrassed. Telling the internet anonymously is completely different. It was October 1st. That fresh autumn breeze was in the air. It felt like fall, my favorite season. It was my boyfriend Carter and I's first fall living together in our new home. I wanted to surprise Carter by decorating the place with fall and Halloween-themed decorations before he got home from work one day. I thought it would be cute. I bought a few things from a nearby Marshall's and a few other stores, and I also looked on different apps and websites, most notably Facebook Marketplace. I simply typed in fall decorations, and one listing really caught my attention. It was a picture of a big green plastic container, which contained a bunch of fall decorations. I clicked on it for more details, and more or less it said, "Everything must go. Entire container of fall-themed decorations for sale for cheap." The price was only $20. It was a steal if that entire big container was full of decorations. At the bottom of the ad, it also said, "Selling other stuff, clearing out house, everything must go. Check my profile." So I clicked his profile and looked at some of the other listings he had. There was a weird assortment of things this guy was selling. An allegedly new iPhone for $700, a few articles of women's clothing, and Christmas decorations. There were others, but I didn't go through all of them. The profile itself was kind of low-key. Everything was private. The man's name was Cody, and his profile picture was a close-up of a gray trucker's cap on a guy's head, but his face was covered by the brim of the hat. The cover photo was a blurry photo of a lake. I messaged the profile, and he replied instantly. I asked what kind of decorations were in the container, and he said all sorts. Tableware, outdoor decorations, etc. So I excitedly told the man I would come by them today if he were available. He confirmed he would be around later on, closer to 9 p.m., as that's when he'd get home from work. He sent me an address. I looked up the address on Google Maps Street View. It was not in the best town, honestly, but the house looked completely normal. 2 cars in the driveway in the Street View picture, lawn kept nice, so I agreed to meet. I had my friend Sally come with me just to be safe. I went to pick up Sally across town, and we were off to this Cody person's house. It was a half-hour drive. Sally and I had some time to catch up on the drive there. When we got off the highway entering the town that the house was in, Sally started half joking around about how sketchy the area was. I say half joking around because I know she was saying that partially to be funny and make light of the situation, but also because everyone just kind of knows this really isn't the best town. It was dark out though, so honestly we didn't see much besides streetlights, traffic lights, and some storefronts. As we got closer, I saw my phone screen turning on as it vibrated in the cup holder of my car. At the next light, I checked my phone and saw that it was messages from Cody on Messenger. He said, "When you get here, you can come right in." I showed it to Sally and she said, "What the hell?" We both could agree that that was a bit uncomfortable and that we'd ring the doorbell anyway. We pulled up to the house and surprisingly there were no cars in the driveway. There were dim lights on in the house though that could barely be seen through the closed blinds of the windows. I messaged Cody back saying, "We're here, can you come to the front?" Sally and I both watched the house as I waited for a response. And then we both noticed at the same exact time, at one of the windows, the blinds slightly shift, indicating someone was watching us through them. Then, just as quickly as we noticed it, the opening in the blinds closed. A few seconds later, the front door opened, and Cody messaged me back saying, "I'm at the door, you can come in." It was a bit of an unsettling situation, and I was just happy I brought Sally along. The two of us got out of my car and walked closer to the front door. Before getting too close, I called out Cody's name a few times, only to get no response. Sally whispered we should leave. I took a few steps closer and said "Cody" one more time really loud, and there was no response. I turned and whispered, "Let's go," and we started walking back to the car, when suddenly I heard a guy say, "Hey, yes, I'm here, inside." We turned and saw a man at the doorway, but only about half of him. He was like peering only half of his body around the door. He waved us inside. Sally and I cautiously turned back and started walking back to the door. As I got closer, he fully opened the door, but then also walked out of view. We walked up the steps and into the house, keeping the front door open, and right away got hit with a strong scent, like that cotton scent from an old person's house mixed with something very unpleasant. We heard fast and heavy footsteps moving away into another room, followed by his voice saying, "It's over in here, come here." His voice was freakishly deep, like it was intimidating. I made sure Sally was right by my side before entering the adjacent room. We were faced with a very weird sight. A dimly lit living room with a depressing pinkish red carpet and really old-looking furniture. But the smell in this room was putrid. It smelled like actual death. In the middle of the room was a red container with a green lid on top of it. There was this Cody man standing just over the container. This was the first time I got a good, clear look at the man, and he was not a friendly-looking man. He invited me over to come open the container. I took note of the fact that this container was not the same color as the green container that was in the picture on the Facebook ad. It also was a completely different shape from the looks of it. I asked him to open it himself, and he said, "Well, you're no fun." That comment already had Sally and I inching backwards in the direction of the front door. But when he lifted the lid off the container and we were suddenly blasted with another putrid smell, we turned for the door and left in a hurry without looking back until we got to the car. Sally kept telling me to hurry up. By the time my car was on, all I know is the front door to the house was already closed. I don't know if he was watching us through the window again. We were gone very quickly. We never actually saw what was in that container. It was definitely not decorations though. After telling Carter about all of this, he asked for the address of the place, and I told him not to go there. He assured me he wouldn't, he just wanted to look up the house, so I gave it to him. The next day, he returned home later than usual from work, and he told me he stopped by the house, and an older woman answered the door, insisting that she lives there alone. He knew I wasn't lying though, because I showed him all the Facebook messages with the guy, which included the address. Upon looking up the records of that address, it does list the owner as a woman in her late 60s. This was an incredibly disturbing and unexplainable experience. From now on, when buying stuff online, I avoid going to people's houses. It was 2019 when this happened. I remember specifically because it was the year I was living on my own in Asheville, North Carolina. I moved here for a temporary job, and it was an excuse for me to live on my own for the first time. I was 22 years old and just out of college. I had an apartment in downtown. I could walk to most things I needed, but I also had my car for when I wanted to branch out or venture out of town. The thing I loved about Asheville and North Carolina in general was the sheer amount of hiking trails. I'd been to many around town, but one I hadn't been to was DuPont State Forest. One day I decided to go. The drive was just under an hour from Asheville. It was a random Wednesday in October. The leaves were starting to change, and it was the perfect time for a hike. I didn't have work that day, and it being a work day for everyone else, it meant I'd probably have the trails all to myself. I got to the parking area for the park, and I found where one of the trails began. I walked for a while, and the trail was serene. I was the only one out there that day. It was a cloudy day, and we'd been getting a lot of rain that week, which was more of a reason I wanted to go, because the trail would lead to some nice waterfalls called Triple Falls and High Falls, and the waterfalls would be more impressive after a few days of rainfall. I only had to hike about 0.4 miles before getting to the Triple Falls, which was a really cool sight. A little piece of trivia, a scene in the Hunger Games was filmed at this waterfall. I took a few videos and pictures as I sat on a rock for a bit. I noticed a woman in the woods on the trail. She was looking at me. I waved at her, trying to be polite, and she just turned around and slowly walked deeper into the woods until she was out of sight. Not really something I gave a second thought to. Anyway, I wasn't tired yet. I had literally just started hiking, so I didn't sit for too long. I got up and headed back to the trail. I didn't want to try climbing the rocks of the waterfall because they were incredibly slippery. I continued to ascend up the trail and eventually came to the higher point of the falls called High Falls. I took a few more videos and pictures here and sat on another dry rock for a bit. I swear I felt a sense of deja vu when I saw that woman again in the woods by the trail. Once again, she was staring me down. I didn't wave this time. I instead looked down at my phone, pretending not to notice or care. I couldn't help but glance up after like 10 seconds, and now she was gone. If I had to guess, the woman was like 55. She had short, grayish blonde hair from the looks of it. But again, she was pretty far away, so this was all just what I saw of her from a distance. I didn't see which way she went, but whatever way it was, I wanted to go the opposite. I kept walking the direction I'd been walking, and eventually came to another landmark of the trail, the covered bridge. I once again stopped here to take a scenic video and a few photos. I drank a bit of my water, and then looked at the end of the bridge from the side I had just walked from. I saw that woman. I swear I didn't see her there before I started taking videos and pictures. I also didn't hear anyone walking behind me. She was once again staring right at me as if I were doing something wrong. I was getting annoyed. I started walking over to her and said, "Excuse me," but she just turned around and started walking away. Actually, the speed at which she was walking away for someone at her age was unsettling. I almost felt concern at the possibility that she may have been somebody with special needs that needed help, but I didn't convince myself to go chasing after her. I just leaned on the edge of the bridge for a few minutes before deciding to turn back. I had already been hiking for about 45 minutes, and it would take another 45 to get back down to the car. Walking back down the trail I came, in the direction that woman had gone, I passed a younger woman walking her dog, so I decided to stop her and ask if she'd seen an older woman pass by. She said no, and just trying to make conversation about it, talk to somebody about it, I told her how I kept seeing that woman popping out of nowhere and looking at me, then just walking off. She laughed and said that's really strange. I didn't want to take up too much of her time, so after we both shared a laugh about it, I continued on my way. The entire way down the trail, I grew a bit paranoid that I'd see that woman lurking around in the background somewhere again, but all was quiet on the way down. I passed one other person who gave me a friendly smile and a nod. Other than that, I made it back to my car undisturbed. Later that day, I went on a date with a girl I was seeing there. We went to our favorite local bar to get some pumpkin spice beers and watch baseball. I told her about the woman on the trail, and she found it amusing, because honestly it did sound funny. After that, I went home. Fast forward to that night when I was in bed. I hardly ever wake up in the middle of the night. I'm a pretty heavy sleeper normally, so me waking up in the middle of the night in the dark was unusual. I was still coming to when I heard something at the foot of my bed. I looked up and saw the figure of a woman at the foot of my bed. I felt as though my insides had just fallen out of my body. I started screaming so loud that I'm sure my neighbors could have heard it, even with the windows closed. I started crawling against my headboard, trying to distance myself as much as possible from the female figure at the foot of my bed. Then she just turned and walked out of the room. I stopped screaming now, more so trying to just catch my breath and slow my rapidly beating heart. I flicked on the lamp and started shouting, "Who's there?" I listened, but there was dead silence. I grabbed the knife I had in the nightstand next to my bed and jumped out of bed. I flicked on every light switch I passed until the entire apartment was lit up. There was no one there. Not in the closets, not behind a couch, not under any beds. And so I called my father. I didn't know what else to do. I needed to share what just happened with somebody. My father groggily picked up the phone, and after explaining to him, he said I must have hallucinated it while I was still in my half-asleep state. He said I wasn't fully awake yet, and so I could have been seeing things. I knew deep down he was probably right, but it didn't make the image I saw any less real-looking or horrifying. And then I told him about the woman in the park, and how the figure at my bed actually resembled her. He said if anything, that further proves his point that my brain conjured up a familiar image from earlier that day. Somehow, I went back to sleep that night, with my bedroom door barricaded with my dresser just in case. It wasn't until 2 days later that I heard from my mom that her sister in Germany died. I'd never met my aunt. She'd been basically estranged from my mom, as she hadn't left Germany in over 25 years. My mom and uncle flew to Germany to attend the funeral, and it wasn't until she got back home and I saw the prayer card with my aunt's face on it that once again I felt like my organs dropped out of my body when I realized she looked identical to the woman I saw on the trail that day and hallucinated at the foot of my bed. This story shook my whole family, especially because I told my dad about all of it and the hallucination before we even got news of my aunt's passing. I was born a Catholic, but never found myself to be super religious after confirmation. But goddamn, does this really send shivers down my spine and make me question what exactly I believe in. My friend Carlos and I like to do stupid things together. We've been friends since we were 10, and when we were 21, we became roommates. We lived in Brunswick, Georgia, where we grew up. A little coastal town that had its pros and cons, but overall was an okay place to grow up. But it got boring as we entered our 20s. Anyway, that's neither here nor there. While we did live there, we knew about a creepy looking house that differed from the rest of the houses in town, in that it looked like it was built in a different century. It had long been abandoned, and we and our friends would make up stories about its history. It was mid-October, and everyone was in Halloween mode. People were doing Halloween-themed activities like haunted houses and corn mazes and such. We thought it would be fun one Friday night to go break into that house and explore. So after we were both home from our jobs, we both grabbed baseball bats to bring with us, stopped for some fast food and beers on the way, and drove to the house. We parked all the way down the road just not to be suspicious. The houses around there were not that close together, so each property was pretty big, which meant we were less likely to get caught snooping around. We both grabbed a couple beers each and threw them in our backpacks. Not sure why we thought we were going to drink in there, but along with that, we stuffed our baseball bats into the sides, just so no one would see us walking around with baseball bats in our hands late at night looking like trouble. We quietly walked down the street, just whispering to each other. It took less than 5 minutes to get to the house. It was so dark on this part of the street because this house, along with the house across the street, had no lights on. There weren't any street lights on the street. Whatever light there may have been would have had to come from one of the few houses with their lights on. From here on, we used our flashlights we brought. The front lawn had a bunch of dirt patches, and the patches of grass were overgrown. Lots of weeds everywhere, it seemed. We walked around to the backyard to look for an entry point because doing that out front seemed stupid for obvious reasons. Shockingly, the back door was already unlocked. The place wasn't boarded up or anything. The back windows weren't even smashed. We knew that the place was abandoned though, everybody did. We walked right in. Navigating inside of there would have been impossible had it not been for our flashlights. The house was bigger than some of the neighboring houses, yet the inside felt very cramped. Like there were a lot of rooms, but they were smaller, almost giving the house a maze-like feeling. Carlos stepped into another room away from me, and at that moment I was alone. I heard his voice say from another room, "Yo, there's still furniture everywhere." I responded, "Yeah, this place must have been abandoned in a hurry." Everything seemed ancient, like furniture in my grandma's house, only not used in years. I walked around the first floor some more, and came to a tiny corridor with a few doors that led to bedrooms. I entered one of the bedrooms, and it was incredibly cramped. The bed took up 80% of the room. I went through some of the drawers in the dresser, but they all seemed like they'd already been gone through. Same with the closet. Anything left behind besides this old furniture just looked like junk. I heard Carlos say he's going upstairs. I said back, okay. We were speaking at a volume that was just loud enough for each of us to hear. After checking out the other bedroom down on the first floor, which was equally cramped, I went back out to the corridor. There were two other doors, one that led to a bathroom, and then when I opened the final door, I was looking down a long stairway to a basement. I decided, fuck it, I'm walking down. I started descending the steps, each step squeaking and cracking under my weight. I got about halfway down the steps when I realized there was a faint glow coming from down there. I turned off my flashlight, and yes, there was still a little faint glow coming from down there. I should have turned and left in that moment like any normal person, but I do stupid things. Like I die first in a horror movie, most likely. I continued down the stairs with my flashlight off, and when I got to the bottom, I looked around the walls separating the stairs from the rest of the basement, and I saw what was just barely lighting up the room. It was 2 tall candles sitting on a table, but that wasn't the first thing I noticed. What I saw first was what was next to that, and it was some kind of sofa rocking chair, and it was rocking. Someone was seated in it. It was facing away from the stairway. All I could see was a hand on one of the arms of the chair. I had to get out of there. I started going back up the stairs as quietly as I could, with each crack and squeak causing me to cringe in fear. I was halfway up the stairs now. I looked back down and could still see the faint glow of the candles, so I continued as quietly as I could. I was almost to the top, and one stair creaked especially loud. I paused for a moment, clenching my teeth so hard. I proceeded up the final steps and made it to the top. I turned to shut the door, but I noticed it was pitch black down there now. The thought of the candles having been put out sent a shiver down my spine. I quietly closed the door, and then I tiptoed around this cramped maze of a house until I found the stairway going upstairs. I stood at the bottom of the stairs and quietly called up to Carlos. He wasn't responding. I sighed and started quietly going up the stairs, repeating Carlos's name. Still no response. I had to go all the way up to the top of the stairs, repeating his name, and he still wouldn't respond. So I said, "If you're trying to scare me, stop joking around. There's someone in the basement. We need to get out of here." That got his attention because he stepped out from a dark room and asked if I was serious. I told him I'd explain outside, but that I'm not kidding. He followed me down the stairs. I was trying less so to be quiet now because I just wanted to get out of that house. We were heading back to the back door where we entered, but when we passed the corridor of the basement door, we both saw the silhouette of a man standing in front of the door. The time for sneaking around was over. I kept repeating just go as we booked it outside and ran for my car. We made it to the car in like 30 seconds. I was already winded by the time we made it back. I backed the car off that street and started driving us home. In the car ride was when I explained in detail what I saw. All Carlos kept saying was, "Yo, what the fuck?" to everything I said. He was in just as much disbelief as me. So while no, I don't think anyone legally lived in that house, I do think someone was squatting in there, down in that basement. Who knows who it was? Honestly, who cares? I just never returned anywhere near that street. This took place back when the first Insidious movie came out. My friend Charlie and I went to see the 10 p.m. screening of it at one of our local movie theaters. The theater we went to went out of business years ago, likely due to the fact that it didn't get enough business. I say that because every time we went there, the theater was completely dead, aside from maybe 3 or 4 other people at most. This night was no exception. Besides Charlie and I, there were 2 other people in the theater, one somewhat larger woman and one scrawny man about 5'7". During the previews before the movie, the man kept getting up and switching seats. It immediately struck us as bizarre. Every time he'd get up, he'd look around the room and even look at Charlie and I for a few seconds every time. Eventually, he walked over to the woman a few seats down from him and started speaking to her in a whisper. She said something back to him that we couldn't hear. Then he said sorry and walked away from her to sit at the last seat in the aisle. He was just 2 aisles down from us. Eventually the movie started, and the opening scene to the movie was a bit scary. It was followed by this loud, scary violin sound. We noticed the guy 2 aisles down shaking his head, and he muttered something. Then he turned around at us and climbed up to our aisle and sat down 2 seats from me. He asked if it's okay he sat there, and I nodded. He said thank you really loud, and I noticed the woman in front of us turned around to look. Charlie and I looked at each other nervously. As the movie went on, he was quiet after the opening scene, until the next time a scary scene came up. He moved to the seat directly next to me and once again asked if it's okay. I don't know why, but I nodded again. I guess because I recognized he may have had a disability or something. He went quiet again when the scary scene ended, but at the next jump scare, he grabbed a hold of my arm and pressed his head into my shoulder. I shook my arm to get him off and said, "Dude, get off me." He apologized and said he's just really scared. I looked at him and he just scared me. He seemed off, way off. He told me he would stop and he apologized again. But when another scary scene came up, he grabbed my arm again. This time he started rubbing my arm a little. I told him to stop again. Then Charlie and I got up and walked to a different aisle. The woman in the theater got up and left, I'm guessing because she was uncomfortable. As we were in our new seats, he turned to look at us for a while. We tried our best to ignore it, but it was too much. We got up and started walking out of the theater. He got up as well, asking where we're going, and then he asked if he could take us out for dinner. Charlie said, "Nah man, we're good, thanks," and we walked out. We walked through the empty movie theater hall and heard the door to the room we were just in click open. We turned around and there was the guy, peeking his head out from the door. When he realized we saw him, he went back into the room. Charlie and I walked faster now to the lobby and told the girl at the front desk about the creepy man making everyone uncomfortable. She gave us a refund because the woman before us also complained about him. We then left and started walking to Charlie's house, hitting his vape pen and just talking about how weird and creepy that was. We were somehow able to laugh about it, even though we were also pissed that we just left the movie halfway through. On our walk home, we both stopped when we heard a rustle in a bush about 10 feet from us and a muffled little laugh sound. Charlie pointed to a bush in front of a house, and we could see that man from the theater creepily poking his head out from a bush. He asked, "Where are you guys going?" He said it with his tone that said everything to us, that we needed to run. We sprinted all the way down the street till I felt like I was gonna throw up. Luckily at that point, Charlie's house was right there. We weren't being followed anymore. He looked weak and probably not fast anyway, but we weren't risking getting shot or stabbed. Something was very off about that man. Maybe he was drugged out, or maybe he belonged in a mental hospital. I'm glad we decided to run. I don't care if anyone judges me, but I like to go to the movie theaters alone. My work schedule is all over the place. I often don't work weeknights. So on a stormy Wednesday night, a night not many other people would be thinking to go drive to a movie theater, I did just that. I always like avoiding crowds in anything I do. That's just how I am. It was 2017. I went to see some low-key movie that probably wasn't at the top of most people's must-see movie lists. I was the only one in the theater, just like I expected. I sat myself right in the center seat of one of the higher-up rows and put my feet up on the seat in front of me. About 20 minutes into the movie, I'd say, I noticed someone a few aisles down. I didn't notice them coming in. The theater was dark because the scene in the movie at the time was in a dark room. They weren't sitting in a seat like a normal person though. All I saw of them was the top half of their head, peering over one of the seats to be looking in a direction that definitely was not the screen. It was still too dark to be able to tell if they were looking directly at me or not, but when the scene changed to a brighter background, the whole theater got brighter. Bright enough to see they were looking basically at me. But their face was so pale and lifeless looking, and their hair messy and wiry looking. I couldn't even tell if it was a man or a woman. I'm an introvert, or just an awkward person, so I didn't really want to ask if there was something wrong. I viewed that as confrontation. The screen went darker again, and at the same time, the person lowered down behind the chair completely until I couldn't see them anymore. They were completely hidden from my view. I couldn't concentrate on the movie now though. I was actually very uncomfortable. Actually quite terrified. I didn't get up though, I stayed put in my seat. Many scenes in the movie passed. I almost forgot about what happened. Almost. Just when I was getting back into the movie, the person's head appeared from behind a seat again. This time much closer, only like 3 rows of seats away from me. I actually let out a holy shit and a loud yell because it genuinely made me jump. Now I was able to see more detail or features in their face. They actually looked lifeless. Their eyes, motionless, hung open. but still I somehow couldn't tell if they were looking directly at me or not. Now I could better see it was a man with long, unkempt hair. I noped the F out of my seat and down the road to the exit. I had to pass the row in which the person was in to get to the exit door. As I passed the row, I looked down it, and while I expected to see the rest of the person's body sitting hunched behind the seats, instead what I saw was something you'd see in a nightmare. There was some guy basically laying on the floor, holding up a severed head perched on a stick. I didn't stick around to see if it was some sick joke or if the head was real or not. I ran for it through the exit door, and I ran out of the back exit of the building to the parking lot. I drove home in a panic, heart racing. That head looked so real. I got home and did some research about possible recent murders or missing people in the area, and I found something. After browsing a list of missing people in the area, I found the picture of a 17-year-old boy named Donald Watkins who had gone missing a month prior, and based on the picture I found, his face could have matched the head I saw in that theater. Of course, that could be my brain trying to connect any similarities, but the hair, the nose, the eyes, they looked like they could actually be a match. The next day, I simply made a call to the theater and told them the story and suggested they check their cameras and see if anything strange came up. I gave them my number to reach me if they needed to, but I never heard from them. I chose to not spend any more of my time on it. I worked at a movie theater in Cobb County, Georgia called the Regal at Estelle. It was a very relaxed atmosphere because it's a quiet town and a quiet movie theater usually. Some weekends it would be busy, especially for big blockbuster movies. This happened on a slow night. I was working the graveyard shift. The theater was doing a midnight screening for some underground scary movie that no one really cared about. A few people actually paid to go see it. Obviously this meant I'd have to stay till the movie was over so I could clean and close up. Past midnight the theater was always basically dead. The phone at the front ticket desk was ringing, so I went from the concession counter to the front desk to answer it. After saying hello twice, some creepy, distant-sounding voice asked me what time we're open till. By distant, I mean I actually felt like he was whispering into the phone, or like his face was 2 feet away from the phone. When I told him the midnight screening ended around 2 a.m., he said, "I'll see you soon." I opened my mouth and went, but I didn't actually know what to say. He hung up. I didn't like the sound of that, "I'll see you soon." I went back to the concession counter to just scroll on Instagram and other time waster apps on my phone. Then the phone rang again. I didn't want to answer it because I somehow knew it would be that guy again. No one calls a movie theater that late. Still, I went to answer it. Like the first time, I didn't get a response till the second hello, and it was the same guy. He said into the phone, "I'm on my way." I replied, "Sir, the movie already started. There's no point in coming now. I won't even be able to give you a ticket this late." He hung up. This had to be a joke. Possibly one of my friends. The voice just didn't sound familiar at all. As the movie was nearing its end, I started vacuuming the lobby and halls, then went to cleaning the bathroom. As I was cleaning the bathroom, someone came in and went to one of the stalls. That meant the movie was likely over, so I stopped cleaning to go back to the counter. People were on their way out, so yes, the movie was over. I waited till everyone was gone, then locked the door. All I had left to do was clean the theater, which wasn't a big job because there were so few people in there. I brought the broom in there and scanned the aisles for trash. There was a little popcorn here and there and some wrappers. It would have been a quick cleanup, but I didn't finish it. I heard this freakish giggle sound. My head jerked to the left to look down the aisles of seats. "Is someone there?" I asked. I hurried out of the theater with a broom and scooper, ready to use the broom as a weapon if needed. And as I was back in the lobby, the phone rang again. It was like perfect timing. I ran to answer it, and without saying anything this time, the voice said, "Why'd you leave the theater?" I hung it up and called the police, asking them to just get here fast. I waited in my car until they arrived, then told them about the calls and the laugh in the theater room. The police asked me to calm down and check the number from which he was calling and see if I recognized it. So I went to the call history on the phone, got the number and put it into my phone. And it was the number for one of my close friends, Joe Peterson. That explained it. He was just messing with me. The cops laughed about it, and after I assured them I was all right, they left. I didn't want Joe to get in trouble. I went back in the theater room calling for him. I called for him throughout the whole building, but he didn't answer. It seemed he left. I texted him and tried calling him, all ignored. I went home after locking the place up. The next day I went to his house just to talk to him because it seemed he was ignoring me, but he told me he lost his phone, that he thinks it was stolen by someone at the bar. He didn't have Find My iPhone enabled, so he couldn't even track it or disable it. I couldn't sleep for nights, worrying that I was followed home by whoever had his phone. Being one of Joe's female friends, whoever stole his phone must have went through our conversations and gotten enough info to know where I worked. That horrifies me. I requested to my boss to stop doing the late night shifts for that reason. I didn't work there much longer though. If anything else ever happens, I'd update. But it's already been more than a year. This is one of my favorite topics that I've covered in the past. New house stories in which unsuspecting people who just moved into their new homes discover something or perhaps someone that shouldn't be there. But before getting into those, I want to thank DraftKings for sponsoring this video. DraftKings is an online, real money casino that lets you play whenever and wherever legally permitted. Choose from over 300 real money games, slots, blackjack, roulette, and live dealer games. With more real money games added regularly, DraftKings Casino is changing the game with new ways to play. DraftKings is safe, secure, and reliable, and if it's not yet available in your state, check out DraftKings Daily Fantasy app, where you have a shot at winning cash prizes all season long. Head to the DraftKings Casino app right now and sign up using promo code Mr. Nightmare, and when you play just $10, you'll instantly receive $100 in casino credits. This happened a few years ago, but it still gives me an unsettling feeling whenever I think about it. The only reason I'm talking about it now is because I feel like it's been long enough since it happened, and I won't risk anything by putting it on the internet. Back then, my wife and I had just moved into the suburbs from the city. We just had our third kid, and between the baby stuff, the toys, and the general chaos, our apartment felt way too cramped. We found a nice house in a quiet, safe neighborhood. The neighbors described it as the kind of place where you'd feel fine leaving the doors unlocked. The house itself wasn't massive, but it was definitely a step up from the tiny space we'd previously been living in. One of the features that caught my wife's eye was the backyard. It had this beautiful, slightly overgrown garden with a few old statues scattered around. They were weathered, a little eerie looking, like something out of Game of Thrones. I know it sounds weird, but my wife and I loved it, said it gave our yard character. I was pretty indifferent, so I left everything as it was, statues and all. I figured it was less work for me, which I was never going to complain about. A few days after we moved in, I was looking out the window, taking in the yard, when I noticed something odd. One of the statues, an angel I think, was facing away from the house. All the others were facing toward us, so it looked strange. I could have sworn they all faced the same direction, but I didn't really know for sure. I didn't think much of it, and just assumed I was misremembering things. The next morning, I looked out the window again, and that's when I noticed it. Another statue had turned around, again facing away from the house. This time I knew something was up. I had never been more sure about anything in my life. I asked my wife about it, but she just shrugged it off and said she hadn't noticed anything. I thought maybe it was my son Jimmy. He was a little prankster back then, always up to something. But when I asked him, he just looked at me like I was nuts. I doubted he'd do something like that anyway. I knew something was going on though, but I couldn't prove it. I didn't want to make a big deal out of it, so I tried to ignore it. Besides, I had bigger problems to worry about. I don't like admitting it, but money was really tight during that time, and I lived in perpetual fear that I was going to lose my job. A few days went by without anything strange, and I started to relax. But then, one evening, I looked out the window, and my heart nearly stopped. All of the statues were lined up in a row at the very edge of the house, just standing there. It was a freakish sight, like something out of a horror movie. I know it sounds ridiculous, but part of me could feel all those eyes looking at me. My breathing went shallow. I couldn't decide whether it was more scary or bizarre. I went outside to get a closer look, trying to make sense of it. Before opening up the back door, I took a few nervous glances around the yard to make sure there was no one out there. It was daylight, but I was paranoid. Eventually, I worked up the courage to open the door and go inspect the statues. I went to lift one of them and immediately realized something. Those statues were heavy, way too heavy for one person to move alone. I couldn't even budge one of them on my own. As I was debating what to do, my wife came outside, and the look on her face told me she was just as freaked out as I was. She suggested maybe some of the other neighbors were messing with us, trying to scare the new people on the block, but that explanation literally made no sense. We had met all of the neighbors, and they all seemed like fairly normal people. Plus, I had trouble believing that anyone sane would do this to a family with young children. This was harassment, not some harmless prank. We ended up calling the police, but as you might expect, they couldn't do much. They suggested putting up some security cameras, but we didn't have the money for that. I told the cops we would, but on the inside, I was really reluctant to do something so drastic. They left, and I guess I felt a little better, even though my wife was still extremely shaken up. My wife and I did everything we could to hide the situation from our kids. Say what you will, but we didn't want to scare them. Nothing happened the next day, or the next. I speculated that the cops had scared whoever was there away, which did track on many levels. So we tried to forget about it, even though neither of us really felt comfortable. I tried to assure myself that maybe my wife was right. Maybe it had just been a prank or something. That didn't do anything to calm my nerves, though. I was on edge, looking out the windows every time I passed by, half expecting to see the statues somewhere else. I hope no one ever has to experience the sensation of feeling unsafe in your own home. A few days passed without incident. I started thinking the nightmare was over, and for the first time in a while, the house was actually starting to feel like home. I could not have been more wrong. It was a weekend. I don't remember whether it was Saturday or Sunday, but it was definitely a weekend since my kids didn't have school. After some breakfast, I went outside to play in the yard with my kids, and that's when I saw it. Spray painted in big black letters on the back wall of our house were the words, "Go away." I nearly dropped my son when I saw it. Without thinking, I rushed my kids inside and told my wife to stay in the house with them. I don't know what came over me. I'm not that brave of a guy, but I started sprinting through the garden, screaming threats at whoever had vandalized my house. Adrenaline was coursing through my veins, and I was looking for a fight. No one was anywhere in my yard, though. Eventually, I gave up looking. As I was walking back towards the house, the adrenaline in me turned to outright fear. This was serious. Someone had left a direct message meant to scare us. They could have meant us harm, and I knew the situation was only going to escalate from there. The police came again and took down another report, but without any leads, there wasn't much they could do. I insisted that they stay on the property in case those people came back, but they told me they didn't have enough evidence to waste resources like that. As far as they knew, some teenage delinquents could have been behind the graffiti. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. They told me they'd make sure a patrol officer was nearby, which I guess was some kind of consolation. My wife was twice as upset as I was, so I reassured her that we'd be okay, even though I was freaking out internally. That night, I was in the kitchen when I heard my wife scream from the living room. I ran in, and she was standing by the window pointing outside. I looked, and my stomach dropped. There were 5 people standing in our backyard, each of them wearing white face coverings. They were dancing around in this strange, jerky way, almost like puppets. We just stood there, watching them, too shocked to move. It was terrifying. I don't know what they were trying to accomplish, but it was the most disturbing thing I'd ever seen. I snapped out of my haze and grabbed the biggest kitchen knife we had. I basically screamed at my wife to call the police, and while she was doing that, I ran out the back door with a knife in my hand. I screamed like a clinically insane person and took one step toward them before instantly regretting it. There were 5 of them and 1 of me. They could have been armed. Before anything else could happen, I turned and ran back inside the house like a coward. The knife must have scared them though, because they stopped dancing and ran into the garden, out of sight. I told my wife to run upstairs, find the kids, and hide, and I guarded the back door in case they tried to break in. By the time the police arrived, those people were gone. The police did a thorough search but couldn't find any trace of them. That was the last straw. I didn't care about the costs. I bought and installed security cameras the next day. My wife was hysterical for weeks after that, begging me to let us move somewhere else. I told her that if one more thing happens, that we would, but that we'd probably be screwing ourselves financially if it came to that. Luckily, the cameras must have done the trick, because those people never returned, and we never had another incident occur on the property. The scariest thing, though, is that we still live in the same house, and never got an explanation for what happened. My wife Taylor and I recently moved out of our old home. She didn't like being so close to her family and wanted to put some distance between us and them, so that's what we did. We don't have kids, and she stopped working ages ago, so she was relatively amenable to my suggestions about where to move. I'm an electrician, so bouncing around isn't much of a problem for me. We eventually settled on New Mexico. We've both been rural people all our lives, so it wasn't that drastic of a lifestyle change. That was about 3 months ago, give or take. We found a fantastic deal on a place way out in the country. The house is honestly bigger than we really need, especially since it's just the two of us and our black lab Lola. But honestly, we figured we'd make use out of the extra space, maybe even host some of the friends we'd make. We'd been settled in for a few months when I started noticing something odd. The upstairs lights kept tripping circuits, but the rest of the house would still have power. After this happened once or twice, I knew exactly what the problem was. Like I said, I'm literally an electrician, so this kind of stuff is my bread and butter. I figured it would be an easy fix, just a matter of rearranging some of the load on the breaker, which in all likelihood was downstairs. Times like those make me happy that I'm the type of guy who knows how to fix things. To be honest, I hadn't spent that much time in the basement since we moved in. I didn't really have a reason to. We'd looked it over briefly when the realtor showed us the place, but I didn't pay much attention. Come to think of it, I don't think I'd been in there one time since then. Anyway, I walked down the stairs and started looking around for the main breaker. The basement was pretty cluttered and definitely not the type of space that could be easily used. It looked more like a storage room than a basement. Eventually, I figured out where the main was and started futzing around. After about 10 minutes, I realized where the load imbalance was and told myself I'd rewire it when I had more time. At that point, I was about to go upstairs when curiosity got the better of me. I figured since I was down in the basement already, it probably wouldn't be a bad idea to have a look around. After all, this is my house, and it was honestly a little strange that I didn't know every square inch of it. Like I said, most of it was filled with old furniture and a bunch of junk. There wasn't anything particularly interesting down there, and I eventually concluded that trying to transform it into a usable space would be way too much of a hassle. That's when I noticed something odd. In the far corner of the basement, behind a stack of old wooden chairs, was a large metal door. It was strange because this wasn't just any door. It looked industrial grade. It was also a lot taller than most normal doors would be, and seemed pretty thick too. I walked over to it, and my suspicions were confirmed. It looked like the type of door you'd see securing a walk-in safe or some kind of panic room. My first thought was maybe it was a tornado shelter or storm room or something, but that would be a weird surprise. You'd think the realtor would have mentioned a feature like that. I tried to open it, but the handle wouldn't budge. It was locked. I immediately went upstairs and started rummaging through the drawer of keys the previous owner had left behind in case we locked ourselves out or something, but none of them worked on the door. I must have tried like 15 keys or something, but no luck. I eventually told Taylor about it, and she was just as curious about it as I was. I'm still not sure how, but she worked her magic, and we were able to get in contact with the previous owners. It was that exact phone call that took me from curious about the situation to downright concerned. They were a little odd on the phone and would pause every so often, like they were thinking carefully about what they were saying or trying not to say too much. Part of me wishes I had recorded the conversation, but hindsight is 20/20. When I asked about the door, they got quiet. Eventually, the wife said it was just a safe room in case of a tornado. I told her that was great, but we were unable to use it since it was locked. After another pause, she claimed they'd lost the key and told us to just ignore it. I thought that was extremely unlikely, since they had literally left us keys to random doors that we'd probably never need to lock. The way she said it gave me a really bad feeling in my gut too, but there was nothing I could do. We ended up hanging up almost immediately after that, as they were definitely not trying to make small talk. Taylor tried to laugh it off, told me I was overthinking it, but I couldn't let it go. Over the course of the next few weeks, I would occasionally wander down the stairs and just stare at that door, wondering what could be inside. I tried everything I could think of to open it, even some tricks I'd picked up from work, but it was no use. The lock was solid. I ended up giving up for about a week, but the curiosity ultimately got the better of me. Fast forward to 2 days ago, when things took a wild turn. After my wife's wishes, I decided to hire a locksmith. He came over, and I let him do his thing down there. After about 30 minutes, I went downstairs to check on him. He told me that the lock was unusually complex for a simple panic room. Those were his exact words. I was worried he wouldn't be able to get it open, but to my surprise, he actually managed to crack it after another half hour. I wish he hadn't. Inside, the room was set up like some kind of shrine. There were old black and white photographs on the walls, all covered in strange symbols that I didn't recognize. In the center was a chair, just facing the wall. It looked like someone had spent a lot of time sitting there, just staring at nothing. In one corner, there was a cot with crumpled blankets, and it smelled stale and kind of gross. Then I noticed the trash. Empty chip bags, crumpled water bottles. The realization smacked me in the face. Someone had actually been staying down there, and not that long ago. I was dumbfounded. I didn't think the situation could get much worse, but of course, that's what happened. As I was trying to take it all in, I noticed a second door on the far right side of the room. It was small and half hidden by the minimal light, but it was there. I opened it and realized it led to a set of stairs that led to the cellar door outside the house. I felt like such an idiot. I hadn't even had the foresight to check the cellar door when we moved in, since I just assumed it led to the basement. In all the time we'd lived here, I had never even opened it. My bewilderment at the whole thing soon became terror. Someone had literally been living in my house for who knows how long. Things started clicking in my brain. Since moving in, my wife and I had noticed a few weird things that we couldn't explain. Most of the time it was just things going missing. Until that point, I had just assumed my wife had misplaced things, which she did have a tendency to do. This discovery changed everything though. Someone had been living in our house. I had to repeat that thought a dozen times in my head before I could fully wrap my mind around what was going on. I didn't know who had been in there or why, but I knew I didn't want them coming back. I tried calling the previous owners, demanding an explanation, maybe even threatening legal action, but they wouldn't pick up. Either they disconnected their number, or they just didn't want to deal with it. Taylor was freaked out, and I was too. That night, I took some heavy furniture and barricaded the cellar door from the inside. I found a heavy-duty looking chain and padlocked it shut for good measure. I didn't care what it took. There was no way I was letting someone sneak back in through that door. The police came and took down a full report before leaving, telling us they'd do their best to try and get in contact with the previous owners. We even called our realtor, who was horrified and said she'd assist the police in any way she could. That night, as we were getting ready for bed, we heard it. There was a loud bang on the front door. Lola shot up, barking like crazy, and we both froze. Neither of us moved, just staring at each other, listening. After a few minutes, the banging stopped, but then we heard small rocks tapping against our bedroom window. Taylor held on to Lola, and I went to look out the window. Taylor begged me not to, but I was furious at that point. In my mind, I was preparing to fight whoever was out there. I grabbed the baseball bat from under the bed and yanked the curtains away from the window, but I couldn't see a thing. We thought it was over. Taylor wanted me to call the police, but there was a little part of me that wanted to handle this myself. I knew the police would scare them away and call it pettiness, but I wanted to make sure whoever was out there got caught. I told her if one more thing happened, I'd call. But then from downstairs, I heard the sound of glass shattering. I sprinted downstairs just in time to see two figures running away from the house. The kitchen window was completely shattered. It was then that I called the police, who showed up not long after. They searched the house and the basement, but there was no sign of forced entry into the storm room. They didn't find anyone on the property either. Their best guess was that whoever had been living down there was angry when they realized they were locked out and decided to come back and scare us. I was both furious and horrified. My wife has been a wreck ever since. The police escalated the situation since an actual crime happened and said they're working on tracking down the previous owners, but that it could take a few days. That was 2 full days ago, and we still have not been able to get in contact with them. I think the police scared away those squatters though, at least for now, as they haven't been back to our house since. I'm actually shocked that something like this could even happen in the first place. If we can't get in contact with the previous owners soon, I have absolutely no idea what I'm gonna do. I'm fully prepared to defend myself, but I hope it doesn't come to that. When I bought my first house, I was only 27. I'd saved up for years, and even though it was just a small, modest place, I was proud of it. Moving in, though, that took some adjustment. I'd lived with my parents my whole life, along with 3 siblings and 2 dogs. The house was loud, always buzzing with life. But this was quiet. Really quiet. That was honestly the hardest part about the transition. The lack of noise. Living alone felt strange, and at first, I wasn't sure I'd ever get used to it. I'm sure anyone who's gone from living with family to living alone knows what I'm talking about. One thing I loved about the house was the tiny balcony on the 2nd floor. Don't get the wrong impression, I don't even know if I can really even call it a balcony. It was barely big enough to stand on, and I couldn't even fit a chair out there. Regardless, I'd go out there most nights after work to take a break and clear my head. I smoked pretty often, but I hated the smell, so smoking inside wasn't an option for me. The balcony was twice as beneficial for that exact reason. I didn't even have to go outside or leave the comfort of my own home just to smoke. It felt like a luxury. I'll describe the layout of the property so what I'm about to tell you makes sense. The block I lived on was pretty standard, with houses adjacent to each other all the way down. The street behind mine was exactly the same, meaning everyone's house would be sharing a backyard if it weren't for the 10-foot-tall fences designating the property lines. From my balcony, I could see over my backyard neighbor's fence and into his yard. You could see the whole place, really. After a few weeks, I realized I'd met almost all the neighbors except him. Come to think of it, I don't think I had ever seen him, let alone have a conversation with him. The guy never waved and never came over. I never saw him in the yard or at the bedroom window. Nothing. It was like he didn't exist. If it weren't for the occasional bedroom light on at night, I would have assumed the place was deserted. I guessed that there was an old person living there since the grass looked like it hadn't been cut in years, and I never heard any sounds from their yard. After another week, curiosity got the better of me, and I decided to go introduce myself and at least put a face to the name. One Saturday, I walked around the block to his place, expecting to knock on the door and maybe make some small talk. But the house looked rough. Rough was an understatement. It looked completely untouched. The yard was a mess, overgrown with weeds, and the whole place looked like it had been ignored for years. The paint was chipping, some of the siding had been scratched off, and the walkway was stained. The doorbell was broken, so I gave a few loud knocks and waited. Nothing. I felt awkward standing there and started to wonder if maybe the place really was vacant. But then I saw a slight movement behind the window shade. Just a flicker, like someone was peeking out. That was enough for me. Someone was in there, spying on me, but wouldn't open the door for some reason. I turned to leave, when all of a sudden, the door flew open, slamming against the wall like someone had ripped it open in a violent rage. I jumped back, totally thrown off. I whipped around and found myself face to face with an elderly Asian woman standing in the doorway, staring at me. She was short, with gray hair pulled back in a tight bun. Her skin was wrinkled, but somehow tense, like she was flexing her face muscles, if that even makes sense. Her eyes were wide, unsettlingly wide. I can't even lie, I was pretty freaked out just looking at her. There was something off about her, like it looked like she was on something. She didn't say a word, just stared with no expression on her face. Eventually, I cleared my throat and introduced myself as her new neighbor. After a few seconds, she said her name was Priscilla and gave me a half smile. And that was it. She didn't even ask my name, she just stood there watching me. I nodded and turned away, not knowing what to say. I left feeling more unnerved than I wanted to admit. I never heard the door close behind me, but I didn't want to turn around and get caught looking. Later that night, I went out to my balcony like usual, trying to forget about the strange interaction. At that point, I had no idea of the ordeal that I had just gotten myself into. When I glanced over the railing, there she was, that crazy-looking lady from earlier, standing